Sudden death came to the protagonist in a way he had never imagined. Awakening once more, Almas found himself in a different world. Perhaps it was the afterlife, but there were no Sanzu River or flower gardens commonly spoken of. Initially, he felt an intense hunger and considered eating a leaf nearby. Ultimately, he decided to search for food in the area. Holding a recently caught bug that looked quite terrifying, Almas ate it, thinking he was dead anyway and might as well fill his stomach. For the first time in his life, Almas experienced the horror of eating something alive. Although the experience was dreadful, he felt noticeably stronger after eating. Almas sat down, puzzled about what had happened. He had previously died in a car accident. Approaching a stream, he looked at his reflection in the water with fear. Almas did not recognize the face before him. He wondered if he had died and been reborn as someone else. He thought it might be a case of reincarnation into another world, or perhaps more accurately, soul transference. Almas then considered the possibility that he was dreaming, deciding to go to sleep, believing that when he awoke again, he would be in a hospital bed. Hopefully, the accident was just a minor collision. The next morning, the first thing Almas did was run to the stream to see himself. He had to accept the reality of being in a different body. Almas optimistically began preparing the basics for survival in this forest. A griffin appeared, calling out to Almas to leave its territory quickly. Seeing his fear, the griffin disdainfully said it had standards for its diet and wouldn't bother eating the terrible meat of Almas. Almas thought to himself about being thrown into a strange world with an empty stomach. Last night, he had to eat centipedes to survive, and now he was in someone else's body. Almas shouted in frustration at how everything in this world was so abnormal. He first apologized to the griffin for entering its territory. It spoke of a contract between it and humans that even children knew about. It asked Almas to justify his presence, saying it would spare him if the explanation was reasonable. Knowing the griffin wouldn't believe him but needing to protect his life, Almas still decided to tell the truth. He explained that his soul had entered this body. Without any knowledge of the forest or whose body he inhabited, Almas listened to the griffin's response. The griffin, realizing Almas was lost, apologized and continued, advising him to get accustomed to this new world and to resent his unfortunate fate if he wished. After a conversation, the griffin agreed to spare him on one condition: it needed his help. The griffin led Almas to a large cave filled with many children. Almas, with a puzzled expression, asked what this meant. The griffin explained that they were his kin, and for some unknown reason, humans had recently been abandoning their children in its forest. This made Almas think about the body he was occupying. Could it be that this body was also abandoned in the forest due to famine? He asked the griffin if his task was to take care of these children. The griffin commended him for catching on quickly, asking him to care for the children until they could fend for themselves. Almas wasn't averse to children, having come from an orphanage himself. He could empathize with them, but the problem was the lack of food. The griffin, understanding his concerns, promised to provide food for 3 years. By then, Almas and the children would have to adapt to sourcing their own food. Surprised, Almas had thought the griffin would instruct them to eat insects. After some thought, Almas asked the griffin why it was saving these children. The griffin countered, asking if Almas would leave the starving, helpless kids alone. It said, having saved them, it was its responsibility to see it through. Almas noticed a small pile of fruit in the cave and guessed it was brought by the griffin. Humans and griffins were fundamentally different, he surmised, and perhaps the griffin needed his help because it didn't understand how to care for humans. Turning back to the griffin, Almas acknowledged his understanding and agreed to take care of the children from then on. He turned to the kids and announced that he would be their leader from now on. The children responded, but Almas couldn't understand their language. The griffin apologized, explaining that someone from another world couldn't comprehend the language here. It added that it was able to communicate with Almas because it possessed the divine blessing of the divine word. The griffin offered to lend Almas its protective power, which sounded to Almas like a mighty force from a fantasy world. After receiving the griffin's assistance, Almas was amazed to find himself naturally speaking and understanding a foreign language. The children around him suddenly became comprehensible in a miraculous way. A boy named Ron stepped forward, introducing himself as the current leader. Almas, indifferent to Ron's attitude, greeted him cheerfully. He continued to inquire about the names of those around him until Ron, becoming angry, approached Almas and declared that he had not yet acknowledged him as the leader. Almas laughed, understanding the boy's thoughts about suddenly having a new leader. Soyen approached to apologize, explaining that Ron meant no harm but was just a bit foolish. Observing the group of abandoned children, Almas thought they seemed happy at first glance, but he was sure they were suffering. He assured them he would protect them. Almas thought about starting agriculture to ensure their survival in this place. His knowledge of farming was limited, but it seemed the only option. The Griffin had mentioned it would only provide support for 3 years, so the 31 children and Almas needed to be self-sufficient by then. Ron skeptically asked if Almas realized how difficult farming was, especially in a dense forest where trees would need to be cleared. The biggest challenge, however, was that they were all children, with few capable of handling tools. Rose told Almas it was futile, urging him to give up. Gran disagreed, arguing they had no other plans. Almas ignored the children's quarreling and ordered them to find farming tools, knowing that with the right tools, everything would be easier. They would obtain these tools through bartering, using the abundant resources available in their area. As he finished speaking, the Griffin brought a large number of swords, left behind by foolish warriors who had challenged it. Almas knew many heroes had come to defeat the Griffin but was surprised by the amount of weaponry. The Griffin complained about the annoyance of having these discarded weapons cluttering its forest. Tetra stepped forward, asking if Almas planned to use these weapons to trade for farming equipment. Ron's eyes lit up as he suggested using the weapons to buy food instead. Almas, again disregarding Ron's words, asked if anyone knew the area well. Tetra responded that she did and began to describe their location. They were in the Romania forest. To the east was the kingdom of Rosais, to the northwest was Guild, northeast was Dom Igra, and north was the kingdom of Faldarm. Rosais was notably poor in iron tool production. Meanwhile, Demerga and Guild, plagued by famine, were attacking Faldarm. This, Almas realized, was an excellent opportunity to sell the weapons at a good price. After trading the weapons for agricultural tools, Almas discussed his rice planting plan with the Griffin. The Griffin informed him that 30 years ago, people had lived in a nearby forest but had abandoned it due to an epidemic, blaming it on a curse from the Griffin. The Griffin took Almas flying to locate the land, suggesting that it was more convenient to use the existing land than clearing a new area. Almas found the village had clean water, houses that needed only minor repairs, and importantly, a clear plot of land for rice cultivation. He thanked the Griffin, finding the place better than expected. The Griffin nonchalantly replied it was nothing special and not its doing. The next day, Almas took the children there and explained his crop rotation plan. They would alternate between planting clover and wheat in a 4-year cycle. Ron questioned the complexity of the plan, pointing out that it would deplete the soil nutrients, making it harder to cultivate. Almas patiently explained to Ron and the others that clover would help replenish the soil's nutrients, allowing for continuous cultivation throughout the year. Additionally, livestock waste would serve as fertilizer, further restoring the soil. This continuous activity of both the livestock and the soil was the essence of crop rotation. It sounded like magic but wasn't, hence it had several drawbacks, like reduced yield due to dividing the land into 4 parts. Having livestock was a significant advantage, so acquiring animals was the first step. Rose, upon hearing this, frowned and expressed his confusion. Almas succinctly explained that crop rotation would yield more produce than usual. He revitalized everyone's spirits, stating that their first task was to repair the houses. Lulu approached Almas, curious about what he was looking at for so long. He pointed to an empty plot of land, pondering the possibility of raising goats. Goats, he noted, could survive on just bark and were easy to keep, even for children, though they weren't particularly labor-intensive animals. Almas preferred the idea of raising cows or horses, but he lacked experience with them. However, He had goat farming experience from his time at the orphanage, which had a goat farm. Lulu questioned the urgency of needing animals, to which Almas abruptly replied that goat milk, despite its poor taste, was highly nutritious. The food provided by the griffin lacked calcium and balanced nutrition. Almas turned to Lulu, asking if she understood what he had just said. Lulu smiled, acknowledging that she understood he was concerned about everyone. Lulu listened to Almas's next plan, but then loudly questioned how they could trade for livestock amidst a famine. Almas disagreed, confident that the kingdom of Rosais, needing a large supply of weapons, would accept the trade. He whispered to himself about needing to ask the griffin to fly to a distant place. The griffin easily agreed to bring goats to the pen for Almas. Amused, Almas noted that the griffin could even communicate with the goats. Though he knew the griffin was merely leading the goats into the pen, it all seemed magical. When going to trade the goats, Almas picked up a bow and arrows for them to practice archery, facilitating future hunting. Almas was continuously mocked by the children for his inability to hit the target after 10 minutes of shooting. He told the noisy children to stop and focused on his own practice. None of the others succeeded in the challenge, until it was Graham's turn, who performed exceptionally well, drawing the attention and requests for teaching from everyone. Their peaceful life didn't last long as an intruder entered the village. Almas heard Rose's distressed screams and thought he still had a sword for self-defense. If a weak animal was attacking Rose, he would drive it away, but if it was a more formidable beast, he would find a way to help Rose escape. To his surprise, as he approached, he realized it was a human's voice. Rose was loudly demanding to know why the man was capturing him, proclaiming he had already been abandoned by his parents. Rose continued, saying that even if captured, he wouldn't provide any food. The man, smirking maliciously, called Rose foolish, revealing he knew about the abundance of steel swords the children had. Almas finally understood the man's purpose for coming there. He rushed to rescue Rose from him, shouting for the boy to run first while he stayed behind to block the assailant. The man, angered, stood up from the ground and questioned if Almas was buying time for Rose to escape. Wielding a large branch, he mockingly warned Almas not to cry. Almas, remaining calm, asked the man his purpose for being there. The man jeeringly admitted he came to steal the steel swords and trade them for food. Relieved, Almas thought he had nothing to worry about. Confused by Almas's reaction, the man was about to inquire further but was swiftly stabbed by Almas. With no other option, as letting the man rob them wouldn't guarantee his satisfaction, and fearing more like him would come if they knew, Almas felt compelled to kill him there. The children soon gathered around, concerned, asking if Almas was all right. He reassured them he was fine and apologized for worrying them. Rose, crying loudly, was worried that Almas might have died because of him. Almas comforted the boy, saying he was just not used to such situations. Later, the griffin arrived to check on the situation. It nonchalantly remarked that such an incident had occurred. Acknowledging the difficulty, the griffin told Almas not to worry about it. It pointed out that intraspecies violence wasn't unique to humans, comparing them to ants on the ground. The griffin's words, though understood by Almas, seemed to oversimplify human nature. The griffin added that it's natural for social creatures to find it problematic to kill their kind, but Almas's current duty was to protect the children and bring them back to their group, which was his mission. Half a month passed, and despite some issues with Almas's vegetable garden, everything was resolved well. Now, their daily task was to monitor the fields. The basic needs like food and shelter were temporarily stable. Almas announced their plan to visit the city to buy additional food, this time heading to the kingdom of Rosais. In the capital of the Rosais kingdom, the streets were bustling with people. Almas smiled joyfully, as it had been a long time since he had seen such a crowded city, which was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Ron's eyes sparkled as he gazed at the food displayed along the streets, constantly calling out to Almas, their leader. Rose excitedly pointed to a clothing store, urging Almas to check it out. Almas told them to calm down, emphasizing that while excitement was good, pulling each other around in the street was not. First, they needed to find a place to exchange money, as they couldn't buy anything without it. After exchanging beast fangs for currency, Almas took out some herbs. A nearby girl, rushing over, asked if that was caramel grass. She requested Almas to sell her the herb, assuring him it wasn't for free. After successfully negotiating the price, Almas curiously asked what she intended to use it for. Yura explained that mixing it with cannabis created an excellent opium. Almas wondered to himself about her upbringing. Yura then asked where he was from. He vaguely replied that he lived in a village more than a day's journey from there. She inquired if he could show her where to find such precious caramel grass. Almas, seeing no benefit for himself in her request, declined. Eventually, they struck a deal. Each month, he would bring caramel grass to sell to her for 1 gold coin. Before leaving, Yura whispered to Almas, noting he had exceptional protection. Back at the village, Almas diligently learned the language of this world. He was able to communicate with Tetra and others thanks to the griffin lending him linguistic protection. However, he knew he would eventually have to return it, and suddenly being unable to communicate would be problematic. Almas also started teaching the children basic arithmetic. Lulu curiously asked what the benefit of learning addition was. Almas commended her for the question, explaining that they needed to learn more than just agriculture. They also needed to trade materials for money, but without knowing how to calculate, they could easily be cheated by traders. In the event they learn arithmetic, they could even become merchants and open their own businesses. And these kids also might have a multitude of choices for their future. A month had passed since Almas began teaching the children arithmetic. Tetra, who always ranked first, took on the responsibility of teaching the other children. She approached Almas to complain that she was teaching without any special treatment or fairness. Consequently, Almas decided to offer her special attention by teaching her to calculate larger numbers. Tetra asked if in his homeland everyone could do arithmetic. Indeed, even children younger than Tetra could. But Almas thought Tetra was the most skilled because she had to remember his Arabic numerals and learn arithmetic as well. As promised the previous month, Almas took herbs to the city to meet Yura. During this trip, Almas also wanted to ask her more about protection. Yura asked back if Almas was curious because she knew of his protection. Almas expressed his desire to learn more about it. In truth, Yura didn't know much either. However, based on information and documents, it was granted by some fairy. Yura reconfirmed that they were kind fairies. And it was easy for her to recognize Almas's protection because hers allowed her to see others' protection, known as the eyes that see through blessings. From what Yura could see, Almas had the protection of kings. She informed him that the more people saw him as a leader, the stronger his abilities would become. Almas silently thought this meant the children had accepted him as their leader. Yura looked at Almas, wanting to ask him a few things. It seemed he was living in the Romanian forest, Griffin's territory, and she wanted to know if he wasn't afraid of Griffin's curse. Almas cautiously asked how she knew they were living there. Yura explained that she could see an object from a great distance, her protection known as the eyes of heaven. She had seen people entering the forest and guessed they were living there. Yura asked Almas to please tell her how he avoided Griffin's curse. Almas revealed that there was actually no curse. At this point, Yura realized that they were all orphans. She promised him that she would not tell anyone about this. It was Almas's turn to ask her why she bought so many herbs and stones. Yura revealed to him that she was a witch. A witch can do many things, and casting curses is one of them. For instance, creating magical barriers, breaking curses, or even concocting potions. Almas remembered Griffin saying that the current disaster was caused by humans through curses. Regarding this, Yura explained that it was mostly due to a curse, believed to be cast by a high-level witch. However, Yura believed it wasn't a person but likely an entire nation. Such a large-scale curse could claim the lives of thousands. Yura reassured Almas that she wouldn't let it happen again next time. Almas, surprised, asked Yura if she wanted to visit Ramalia. She joyfully asked if she really could. But she had to ask her father first, as he wouldn't allow her to leave the city. Thanks to selling herbs to Yura and harvesting vegetables, the children no longer worried about food. However, what they needed, like salt and clothes, was quite expensive. Almas decided they would become self-sufficient by making pottery. A day before meeting Yura in the store, he had asked her what the most valuable thing in this place was. He wanted to find something valuable to exchange for salt and clothes. Yura looked around and pointed to the pottery jars. The pottery in Kirizia was completely different from what was made here. It had a longer lifespan and more striking colors, popular among the nobility. After returning, Almas began researching and discovered anagama. In a sealed space, heat could easily be increased, and oxygen limited by closing the kiln and the chimney. This way, they could produce a black pottery jar, which couldn't be made outdoors. For Almas, building a kiln was now relatively easy. He didn't know what the Kirisha pottery mentioned by Yura was, but with anagama, he was sure his pottery would be the best. Almas announced to everyone that their current goal was pottery firing. If successful, their village would have its first product of its own. Moreover, thanks to his protection, everything was much easier for Almas. As winter passed and a new year approached, Griffin brought Almas a group of new children he had found in the forest. Almas looked at the children and remarked that their number had increased by 10 after this winter. He curiously asked Tetra how many types of taxes there were in this place. She replied that it depended on the country and its power, but there were usually 4 types. Almas was puzzled, wondering if the parents had to abandon their children in the forest to avoid taxes. He asked her if all the children were from the kingdom of Rosais. But he knew that taxes in Rosais were much lower than in other places. The king of Rosais was not known for imposing high taxes, so where did these children really come from? Soyan, standing nearby, answered that they were all citizens of Rosais. There was a great house of a duke named Ash, whose leader had been betrayed by his subordinates. Furthermore, the traitors wanted to separate from Rosais, which of course the king did not accept. This caused an internal conflict within the Ash family line. Hence, the people faced insufficient funds for the winter and lost many in the conflict, leading to the decision to impose high taxes to compensate for the losses. Hearing this, Tetra asked again if it was true. Suddenly, she burst into tears, whispering that she knew that her parents also. For Almas, it was normal for children to cry, but he usually comforted them. However, this was the first time he saw Tetra cry. This made Almas think about Tetra's future and that of the newly arrived children. There seemed to be a lot to consider before deciding on the next steps. While Tetra was resting, Almas quietly instructed the other children not to do anything strange and to act normally when she woke up. He guessed she would be embarrassed remembering her recent behavior. On the monthly appointed day, Almas went to the city as usual to deliver herbs to Yura. This time, Almas boldly asked her if it would be okay to meet her father. Yura was a bit surprised but said her father would be very eager to meet her friend, so it should be fine. Almas had thought about this before but only spoke of it today. Romalia Forest was surrounded by 4 nations, and the kingdom of Rosais was the most unstable, constantly experiencing conflicts. It would be safer if the children were under the protection of someone powerful. According to Almas, Yura's father was the most suitable person with enough power. Of course, paying taxes could be a bit troublesome, but he and the children couldn't always rely on Griffin's protection. On the way back with Yura, Almas was curious about the many large houses around. It took him a while to realize that this was the road leading into the palace. Almas wiped his sweat silently and asked Yura if she was teasing him, saying it wasn't funny. Yura led him before the king, to his astonishment. The king expressed his delight in meeting Almas and thanked him for spending time with his daughter recently. Only then did Yura remember to tell Almas that her father was the king of Rosais. Almas, with a trembling voice, asked why she didn't tell him earlier, as it was quite a shock. He knelt before the king, honored to be there, and also honored to be Yura's friend. The king told him there was no need for such formalities, just to see him as Yura's father. This was the first time his daughter had brought a friend home. She had always been immersed in studying magic and had no friends. The king guessed Almas's purpose wasn't just to meet Yura's father. The king said that since he was a close friend of Yura, he would be willing to help in any way he could. Almas acknowledged and then explained to the king everything that had happened. The king was unaware that his subjects had been abandoning their children in the forest. Now that he knew, it seemed he needed to take responsibility. Almas clarified that he wasn't demanding shelter or anything else. The king said that protecting his subjects was his responsibility. He bowed his head in thanks to Almas for taking care of the nation's future generation. Almas couldn't believe that the king of her country had just bowed to him. The king continued, saying that having Almas as a citizen was an honor for him. With all his power, he would protect the people and their property. Almas thought that this way, the children would have a solid foundation for the future. Finally, he could feel more at ease. However, the king had 3 requests. First, he wanted Almas to introduce him to the village and personally assess whether Almas's words were true. The second request was to continue being friends with Yura. And the last was for Almas to teach mathematics to the king's daughter. Returning to the village, Almas noticed that Tetra's demeanor had been off lately. From the beginning, she had been a contemplative person. But recently, something seemed to be disturbing her peace of mind. Not just him, but the other children had also started to notice. If something was indeed wrong, it couldn't just be left unaddressed. While Tetra was tending to the vegetables alone, Almas approached her. He said that if she didn't want to talk, she didn't have to, but at least let him know what was causing her pain. Tetra, taken aback, asked if he already knew. Almas told her that her current state was apparent to anyone who looked at her. He promised that whatever she told him would remain a secret. She loudly declared that her name was Tetra Ash. Almas realized everything. She had become like this after learning about the purge of the Ash family. He had suspected her connection to the Ash clan earlier. Seeing that Almas had no strong reaction, Tetra asked if he wasn't surprised. He admitted to being a bit surprised, not expecting to find an Ash clan princess here. He paused and then said that regardless of her past or present, Tetra would still be everyone's Tetra. She seemed to understand something and thanked Almas. In a low voice, she said she knew her parents were dead, but she didn't want to believe it. She had always hoped they were just captured, unable to forgive a man named Robert. He was a close associate of her father, favored to rise from a commoner to a high-class noble. Yet, he repaid kindness with treachery, unforgivable. Almas, understanding her, asked if Tetra wanted to take revenge on him. She replied that she would like to tear him into 100 pieces, but she didn't want to leave this place and her friends now. Almas realized that she wanted to avenge her parents but didn't want to lose this place and her friends. He assured her that everyone wouldn't abandon her. Tetra tearfully said her parents used to tell her the same thing. Almas then shifted the conversation, saying she would be the one to protect everyone here, including him. He added that Tetra was a smart girl, smarter than him. After hearing Almas's words, Tetra smiled happily, promising to protect everyone. Almas seriously told her that if she ever wanted to seek revenge, she must inform him. He would help her in every way possible. Almas didn't want her to do anything reckless as she was very important to everyone. Tetra bashfully admitted that she didn't hear anything he had said earlier. Almas had tailored his communication with Tetra to be more persuasive. With that matter resolved, months and years passed. Thanks to Tetra, Almas's writing skills improved continuously. However, they faced another issue related to tax payments. Moreover, Griffin's support was also ending in a month. As expected, Almas's village had to start being self-sufficient. Today was the day Almas went to see the king to discuss teaching Yura. The king surprisingly asked if Almas wanted to stop teaching his daughter. He continued, asking if Almas didn't like his daughter anymore. If Almas really left, his daughter would be very lonely being alone. Almas listened to the king's barrage of questions, clarifying that was not his intention. He just wanted to know how long the king expected him to teach. The king replied that there was no fixed term, but it would be until Almas had nothing left to teach his daughter. Almas curiously asked if Yura had no other friends besides him. The king sadly confirmed that she had no other friends, only Almas. He couldn't elaborate, but Yura had some animosity towards a family she was once very close to. Almas asked if the princess was only allowed to associate with useful people. No, that wasn't it. It was because Yura was of royal blood and thus often avoided by others. Almas couldn't understand why, as the princess was a very kind person. According to the king, it would be normal if she was just a princess. However, perhaps because of a curse or a blessing, she was very skilled in dark arts. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Yura's talent was once in a millennium. The king even predicted that after growing up, his daughter would become a high priestess. Almas worried if this was okay. The king told him not to worry, all the people in this land knew of the princess's talents. And more importantly, Yura was the king's only daughter. This meant that the princess's husband would be the future king. Due to this, many ambitious people always sought the position, and Yura was sensitive to such individuals. Almas was curious why the king didn't hide the princess's identity so she could make friends with commoners. The king explained that it was quite difficult as everyone in the area already knew who the princess was. Moreover, for safety reasons, leaving the capital was not feasible, and despite appearances, Yura was actually quite shy. The king told Almas that his case was an exception. The princess's passion for herbs had overcome her shyness. Almas pondered over the trustworthy children in his village whom Yura had not yet met. He took a risk and asked the king what about his village. The king thought for a while and said it was a good idea but questioned if the princess could actually go there. And so, Yura was invited to Almas's village, becoming its first official guest. She had already met Ron and Rose several times before, and now she was trying to get acquainted with the others. Soyun ran up and asked Yura and Almas what their relationship was. Yura jokingly said that he was her boyfriend. Hearing this, Tetra secretly hit Almas, causing him to continuously plead for forgiveness. Baltan, Yura's bodyguard who came with her, laughed and said Almas was too famous for his own good. Almas looked at him and said he thought the princess's bodyguard would have a crowd of people. Baltan smiled, saying it wasn't necessary, as that would just show the king's trust in him. Almas responded, asking if it wasn't because Baltan's skills were more than enough to protect the king's only daughter. Baltan humbly asked Almas not to flatter him, saying he was just a drunkard. Standing beside him, Almas thought he still had one thing hidden. Tetra had a close relationship with the king of Rose Ice, as she was the daughter of Lagos Ash. If the king knew this, he would surely send for her. Personally, Almas also wanted Tetra to return to the kingdom of Rose Ice for her happiness. But the problem was Tetra herself did not want that. She didn't want to be involved in political affairs. Almas whispered that if Baltan knew about Tetra, things would get very complicated. He doubted Baltan would recognize her anyway, as she was only 10 years old back then. Also, currently, it was not an issue since Baltan was completely drunk. Baltan, beside them, watched the children talking non-stop and asked Almas what he planned for them to play. After a moment's thought, Almas suggested that Yura teach everyone in the village how to use dark magic. Baltan was incredulous, questioning how that could be considered playing. Almas laughed, saying how could someone who preferred poison over flowers play normally with peers. The truth was that Almas planned to teach the villagers various ways to be more self-reliant. He could teach them math, but not dark magic. It was essential in this world. Some girls could become dark magic sorceresses, while men might not be suitable for it. But it would be useful if at least they knew how to counter curses. Besides, teaching magic would help Yura become closer to the children. Baltan, standing next to Almas, began to speak. He said he might be a bodyguard but was also a commoner. So Almas didn't need to speak to him so formally. Almas agreed and then asked if it took a lot of effort to become a bodyguard like him. Baltan disagreed, saying the king of Rose Ice didn't care about background, only skills mattered for promotion. He was sure they would recruit Almas when he was older. At least as a government official, and if more capable, he would even be granted land. His country was in a state of instability and needed help from outsiders. He added that the king was very much looking forward to something from Almas. Almas thought being a government official wasn't bad, but only after everyone in the village was self-reliant. A few days later, Almas was summoned to the royal palace by the king. The king inquired about the report Baltan submitted. Had Almas's agricultural harvester been tested anywhere yet? Almas realized this was the main reason he was called. It started when Bolton came with the princess, and Almas introduced many devices he had created. The agricultural harvester was an invention in his country's revolution. Almas hadn't yet told the king he was from another world. He had to reply it had been tested. Almas added that his fields didn't follow the 4-year cycle like in this place. The king asked if he thought it was feasible for his country. The truth is, the harvester wouldn't be fully effective when used on a small scale. To increase the area and provide support, people and effort are needed. The only way to achieve this is to make them landowners. But this would be difficult due to Rosa's politics, especially considering the influence of wealthy families. The king decided to change the subject, saying that thanks to Almas's harvester, he would receive a reward from the king. Almas asked for agricultural horses, to which the king agreed, offering 2 horses and a year's supply of feed for free. Then the king wanted to continue discussing other issues with Almas and called his brother to join the discussion. Once all 3 were present, the king began asking Almas about his thoughts on the political structure of his country. Almas frankly stated that it was not tight and had many loopholes. It was built on blood relations and territorial control, but it began to collapse by the 2nd or 3rd generation. The current situation is that the military and financial resources of the king are scattered across the country and controlled by powerful families. Such a country would be difficult to control in the event of war. The king continued, asking if Almas had any suggestions for upgrading the current political system. Almas replied that he thought they should start with the central government. The king agreed with this opinion. Raymond, the king's brother, was astonished that someone of Almas's age could think of such things. He asked Almas what he thought was necessary for this reform. Almas informed them that firstly, they needed authoritative figures, people who had the public's trust. For example, creating a legend about the Rosais family being the guardians of the gods. During their lengthy conversation that day, Almas learned about the king's illness. He guessed this was also why the princess constantly researched and prepared medicines. Almas bluntly asked the king how much time he had left. The king said Almas didn't need to know, as this was like a training exercise. He believed Almas, being intelligent, could solve this issue. After speaking with the king, Almas returned to the village with 2 horses. Soyen was the first to notice and loudly called everyone to see. The villagers were delighted to see the horses. Ron laughed and touched the horses, saying it was his first time seeing them. The villagers' attention then shifted to a strange girl sitting on a horse's back. Almas explained that her name was Rhea, a slave of his, because no one in their village knew how to care for horses. To properly care for them, someone with experience was needed. Almas had brought this issue to the king of Rosais, and so the king had granted a horse-care knowledgeable slave to the village. Almas asked everyone to treat Rhea as a fellow villager. While everyone was chatting happily, Graham came out of the forest with a big pig. He shouted that he had caught a wild boar. Ron, seeing Graham carrying a large wild pig, was amazed and asked who he was, not to scare people like that. Almas thought Graham, only 12, had a physique even stronger than adults. Graham told everyone not to be so surprised because he used a bow and arrow, so he had a lot of muscles. Almas looked contentedly at the children, each growing up. He told them the conversation was over and to return to the fields. With the 2 newly gifted horses, they had to work 3 times harder than usual. Soyen, beside the horse, asked Almas if he was preparing something else. Almas mentioned cannabis, which looked similar to marijuana. Cannabis was mainly used to create voodoo, often for pain relief. Next were the seeds of the hemp plant, which were very nutritious. As it's a year-round crop, once sown, it grows quickly. Immediately after harvest, a new crop could be planted. Soyen mentioned that hemp could also be used for clothing. Almas informed them they would use its fiber, but not for clothing. He didn't know if it would be effective as it was still in the experimental stage. Griffin would stop supporting the village after this summer. Taxes for building the village were also increasing. If they couldn't find a solution, they would face an economic crisis. The reason they needed to develop new products was precisely why Almas immediately got to work. While working, He talked about how wrapping paper was very fragile and would easily get damaged when folded. Sheepskin was durable but susceptible to insect damage. Wooden slates were already made in a standard size, which made it difficult to write long sentences on them. They needed something better for information storage: paper. Almas aimed to create paper using available materials. A few days later, Almas brought the finished paper product to show the king, who continuously praised its excellence. Almas explained that this was the latest product from the village, so he wanted to introduce it to the king. The king readily agreed to buy this product. He asked Almas if he could reveal the papermaking method. Almas pretended to have a headache, saying that he wasn't particularly concerned about that. However, he wanted to know if the king could share the profits with the village. The king laughed loudly, saying he was just joking and there was no need to take it so seriously. Additionally, he agreed to buy paper from Almas's village for 3 years, with the condition that Almas improved its quality. If Almas achieved the best quality within the next 3 years, the king would buy it more regularly and promote its production in his country. But there was another condition: Almas could not sell the paper to any other country. As Almas had predicted, the king was preventing the sale of information to other nations. In the blink of an eye, a year passed. The time when Griffin stopped supporting the village had also come to an end. Almas wondered if things would have happened the same way if he hadn't met Griffin in the forest. Griffin praised Almas, saying he had led the village well without any casualties. Before leaving, Griffin specifically told Almas to visit more often and to bring some alcohol if he was grateful for what Griffin had done. After returning, Almas immediately called everyone together. He announced the good news that this year's harvest in Rosais had yielded many fruits and crops. As everyone there was born in Rosais, if anyone wanted to return to find their parents, they could now do so. Almas thought that there were many children in the village born in Rosais. If they all decided to return to their parents now, he would face a labor shortage. But that wasn't important because children need parents. Almas's agreement with Griffin had ended, and these children had the right to return home. Rose called out Almas's name and then scolded him, calling him a fool. Almas didn't understand what he meant. Was it because Griffin had removed his protection, leading him to miscommunicate? Rose continued, saying that although they loved their parents, they had been abandoned. No matter if they were their parents, abandoning their children was unacceptable. Lulu said that even though they had more food now, there was no guarantee they wouldn't be abandoned again. Soyen, with a sad face, added that they might be abandoned again or sold as slaves. Rose shouted that they had never thought of returning to that place. All unanimously said they loved Almas and didn't want to leave. One beautiful day, Almas was called to watch Tetra's group practicing magic. He asked if voodoo magic was always this dull. Lulu said she didn't care if he was watching or not. But today was an important lesson, so he shouldn't make noise and distract everyone. Almas stood aside, whispering to himself that magic and curse breaking were indeed very complex and vague. Tetra next to him used magic to create something she called a food supplement for him. Almas wondered if it was dangerous to eat something made from magic. He gave all of it to a passing herd of goats. Lulu looked at Almas with annoyance. She said when she tried to use magic to wither a tree, it took time for the tree to wither. She asked Almas if there was really something wrong with them. As Lulu spoke, she became more angry, saying no one could succeed at first try. And even if they did, it consumed a lot of energy. Almas didn't understand what they were talking about, he just hoped it would be useful. Hearing about benefits, the children showed Almas their skills. The first one, wearing animal fur, said it could hide body odor. Then a girl jumped from one rooftop to another, claiming it was to hide her presence. Or returning like an animal after hunting, she jumped out from the bushes to demonstrate. Almas chuckled, saying these were surely things Lulu had never taught others. The girl asked Almas if he could stop complaining about them, as they had always been like that from the beginning of their training. Later, feeling dejected, she mentioned that she sometimes felt a bit like a wild animal. Almas, suddenly remembering, loudly exclaimed that Soyen's technique was actually incredible. She could transfer her soul to any animal. Lulu laughed loudly, saying that wasn't voodoo magic. Almas, unconcerned, imagined an owl flying high in the sky. He thought that perhaps this was the most wonderful thing magic could help him achieve. Then Almas imagined a funny scene where Soyen, no longer an owl, still tried to twist her neck like one. He couldn't help laughing loudly, calling it a tragic accident. The group learning magic angrily asked if Almas was making fun of them. Lulu, standing outside, told a girl she understood her feelings, but let it go. Almas had no choice but to sit down in a corner. Speaking softly, he pretended to say that voodoo magic was quite gentle after all. Lulu, not wanting to be teased by Almas anymore, approached him to ask what he thought about fire magic. She could create it, but now the village already had fire, so she didn't need to waste magic to help. A year later, life in the village had improved significantly. The village now had 70 people, mostly from King Firm's kingdom. They had left due to high taxes, and the villagers found them unconscious in the forest and brought them back. Tetra informed Almas that among the newcomers were 6 adults who got along very well with Ron. She said they were strong, and cooking with them was fun. With the use of horses in agriculture and their strength, they were able to expand the fields and harvest more. The village was now producing enough for everyone, even exceeding expectations. Almas softly said everything was going well, then took some wine into the forest to find Griffin. After drinking, Griffin said the wine was delicious, a sign the village was doing very well. He was very happy that they were becoming more independent and no longer dependent on him. This was much better than the children dying of hunger. However, Griffin had something important to tell Almas. One day, if faced with a disaster or invasion, if the children need help, Griffin would lend a hand. However, it would still depend on Almas's decision. Almas expressed his gratitude but hoped such a situation would never arise. Griffin also didn't wish for it, so he urged Almas to try to avoid it. Returning from the forest, Almas discovered that the village had welcomed many new adults. They had come to escape from the kingdom of Firm. The kingdom was often weak against curses, leading to frequent famines. Moreover, the taxes imposed by the kingdom were increasing, with immediate execution as punishment for non-payment. In reality, they wanted to flee to Rosais but found it difficult to cross the border undetected. Then they heard rumors about the village protected by Griffin in the forest, where abandoned children lived happily. A man stepped forward, pleading with Almas for help, promising they could do any work. Suddenly, one of them approached Lulu, grabbing her hand, asking if she was Lulu. She yelled at the person not to touch her. It was too late to act like a mother now, she had been abandoned by her own birth mother. Lulu was the first to express opposition to accepting these people. Then, other children also spoke up against it. Accepting them could harm the relationship with Firm. Soyen, however, thought they should be welcomed. Tetra disagreed, not trusting these people. She suspected it could be a tactic by the kingdom of Firm and suggested they verify the situation. Almas informed everyone that in this case, he would go to the kingdom of Firm to clarify everything. He looked at Ron, instructing him to keep an eye on them while he was away. Almas found Rhea and said he needed a horse to go to Firm with Tetra. Tetra was surprised, asking if he really intended to ride a horse, given he didn't know how. Almas showed her a pedal-like device, saying it wouldn't be a problem. It was used to hang on both sides of the horse for foot placement. Rhea could ride without any tool, but Almas couldn't. It was like the world Almas had lived in before the invention of pedals. Not everyone could become a knight. It would be very difficult to control a horse if your feet aren't secured. But with stirrups, you can easily learn horse riding with very little practice. Almas keeps this secret because he doesn't want to be involved with the military. On their journey, Tetra tells Almas that Roland Firm is an ambitious king, yet beloved by many. However, judging by the way Earl and others behave, it seems they deeply despise him. Previously, he was a kind man, very close to his father and family. They quickly reach a village in the kingdom, which, as they were told, has become utterly desolate. An army person informs Almas that the villagers had left at midnight, and teams are being formed to search for them. They left due to the excessive taxes. Almas, posing as a merchant, generously offers food, making it easier to converse. He asks if they intend to bring back those who fled. Indeed, based on the tracks, those people might have escaped into the forest. They probably believe in Griffin's paradise. It won't be hard to find them, as Firm's kingdom has wizards and hunting dogs. Almas continues to inquire if Griffin is in the forest, and if entering doesn't disturb him. The soldier painfully admits they know, but the king will still force them to do it. He does not care about the sacred or fear anything. And one thing is certain, he will never forgive those who fled. Once the army brings them back, those people will be nothing but corpses. Almas and Tetra, after gathering information, quickly return to the village to plan their response. He lets the other children know that if they surrender those people, they will surely be killed. Almas shares his opinion that with 70 people in the village, the army would think they could easily crush them. But now, with an additional 30 newcomers, they have 100 people in total. It might be enough to intimidate and prevent an attack on the village. At this point, everyone changes their mind and agrees to help, realizing they need to unite. Soyeon yells out how cruel it would be to surrender them, so she agrees too. Partly because once King Firm discovers the village, they won't be safe either. After concluding the meeting, Almas goes to inform the others. He calls for everyone's attention, announcing that he will respect their wish to stay here. Everyone is overjoyed and loudly expresses their gratitude. Almas gestures for silence and continues, saying it also depends on everyone's behavior. As Almas is pondering how to inform them about Firm's army, Ron rushes in, panicked. He loudly announces that King Firm's soldiers are approaching. They are still in the forest, but undoubtedly heading this way. Tetra, through magic, detects their approach. It's only a matter of time. Almas then directly tells everyone that the army is coming to capture and kill them all. The people are terrified, unable to believe they are in such danger after having fled so far. Earl, from within the crowd, urges everyone to calm down. Stepping out alone, he bows before Almas and apologizes, acknowledging that they have brought trouble to the village. Almas, holding his head, says the situation is serious, but it's too late to do anything now. Even if he hands them over to King Firm, his village might not be spared. Hearing this, Earl declares they will help defend the place. This is exactly what Almas had hoped for. Earl adds that he has some experience in trade and negotiation, albeit limited, and hopes it will be useful in this situation. Almas smiles and asks him to help, and they move to a secluded area to discuss their next plan. Almas states that this is his home and, with little time left, urges Earl to share everything he knows. Earl suggests they first hold a meeting to convince everyone that negotiation is better than fighting. But their first task is to arm everyone. Almas questions whether seeking a peaceful resolution but preparing for battle might be seen as provocation. Moreover, the leader of the enemy is extremely skilled and has never been defeated. Earl emphasizes the key is to make them see that the villagers can defeat them. He starts analyzing that the forest is an obstacle, so they can't bring many people at once. Therefore, the army King Firm brings won't be enough compared to the villagers. Moreover, regular soldiers can't move quickly, so it will mostly be his personal guards. They are the best he has, so he wouldn't want to lose any of them here. Therefore, Earl thinks they just need negotiating terms at the meeting and balancing the pros and cons should be fine. King Firm's purpose is to warn, so he won't bring back bodies. Earl pulls out a ring from his belongings, a token that every Earl's child possesses, which can be used for trading. King Firm and his soldiers enter the pitch-black forest. He feels pained, finding running away truly troublesome. He would feel better if those villagers rose in rebellion. He finds it hard to catch those who flee, easier to kill the rebels. An associate asks if he really plans to kill them all, to which he calmly replies, of course. If he lets them go, more will follow their lead. This matter is crucial, though somewhat brutal, they must do it. Seeing his soldier's unflinching face, he asks what his thoughts are. The soldier, terrified, says he now understands how powerful the king is. He remembers his joyful face when he gained independence by killing Lagos and becoming the king. The people around the king start to echo their hatred for that family, because Lagos was too submissive to Rosais. They're not incompetent, it's just the king's command skills are genius. The king wonders where the child from back then went, a mistake to let that child escape. Others think the child must have died, unable to survive in the big forest. While they're talking, the guide stops, saying they've found the location. But they didn't expect to find a village in this forest. The king, surprised, asks again, a village? Is it the rumored village protected by Griffin? Everyone starts fearing the impossibility of fighting a god. The king, fearing his men might stop, fabricates a story. He said that he had once gotten lost in a forest and met Griffin. Griffin told him it lived deep in the forest and he could do as he pleased. The people moved on and soon discovered the village. They estimated from the number of houses and fields that there were about 100 people here. There were some watchtowers and fences, mainly to keep out wolves. At this moment, the villagers, armed, came out. As Earl had predicted, the king shouted to his soldiers not to do anything. He didn't want to lose any of his men here. Almas stepped forward and introduced himself as the leader of the village. The king said he was only there to punish those who fled the country. Almas loudly informed him that the villagers wouldn't allow him to kill people and that he couldn't comply with the king's orders. The king, curious, beckoned Almas to come forward and speak. He didn't expect Almas to actually come over, admiring his bravery. Almas hoped that things were still going according to plan and wished everyone would remain calm and not do anything unnecessary. Almas approached, saying he was honored to meet King Firm, and asked if he could come closer. The king told him there was no need for that. He knew Almas didn't feel safe. The king wanted to know why Almas wouldn't accept his demand. Almas thought to himself, so this was King Firm, at least he seemed like someone who would listen. Almas said that the village was just a small one, and if the king wanted to kill them, could he spare them? The king couldn't agree, as those who fled must be punished. Almas cautiously asked if the king could punish them but still let them live. He presented the ring that Earl gave him as evidence of the commoners' deaths. The king pondered for a moment, then ordered Almas to hand over all the rings and everything else he had in the village. He would, of course, let everyone live and have clothes. Almas thought to himself that everything Earl had told him was correct. Calmly, Almas told the king that if he took everything, the people would die, so could they keep half? Almas changed his tone to be more assertive, saying if the king wanted to take everything, he would order the village to be burned down. The king believed that Almas' village was not strong enough for battle but agreed to take only 70%. Almas felt this was a high percentage but enough for him to agree. After completing the transaction, Almas returned, feeling relieved that no battle had occurred. Tetra asked what they should do next. Almas had a plan. He would meet with King Rosais first. He needed to discuss refugees and necessary actions. Earl, astonished, asked if Almas knew King Rosais. He requested to accompany Almas, thinking it better to speak about himself. Almas apologized, saying he wasn't the one to decide whether Earl could come. As Almas was about to leave, Tetra hesitantly stopped him, gathering courage to say she would also go. Almas, in disbelief, asked her to repeat. Tetra told him she had thought about it a lot. On their journey, she had shared a lot with Almas. She had always been fleeing because she didn't want to cause destruction. But the current refugees suffered because of King Firm, and as a descendant of that lineage, she felt responsible. Almas looked at Tetra and remarked on her solitary life. Tetra asserted that if she didn't want to do something, no one could force her, and she no longer wanted to live in fear of Firm. She wanted a life of her own. Tetra then asked if Almas would marry her after resolving the situation. Almas, stopping his horse, was taken aback. He said she was important to him, but it was different, and everyone, like Ron, saw it that way. Almas asked her to dismount and calmly talk. He had always seen Tetra as a sister, just as he did Ron and Soyen. Everyone in his village was just a friend. After a moment, Almas loudly declared that as a man, he couldn't accept Tetra's proposal. He wanted to be the one to say those words, asking her to marry him. Seeing Tetra's joy, Almas said they had agreed to marry and should quickly meet King Rosais. Don't forget that everyone is currently in danger. Almas recounted all the difficulties the village had faced. They had lost a lot of food and supplies. King Rosais understood and committed to providing enough food for a year in exchange for Almas protecting the refugees, a common occurrence near the firm border. He was glad they didn't burn Almas' village, as he couldn't collect taxes from the dead. The king then turned his attention to the girl standing next to Almas. Tetra spoke, saying it had been a long time since she last saw King Rosais. Confused, the king asked why she said it had been a long time. Tetra boldly stated that 10 years ago, the king visited her house, and she had met him with her father. The king's expression changed, warning her that if she lied, he would punish her. He asked for the names of Tetra's family, then covered his face, exclaiming that God hadn't forsaken him yet. The king then asked Tetra for proof. She said she had a family crest on her body and asked if he needed to see it. The king apologized for the request but truly needed confirmation. After showing the king the family crest, Tetra produced a ring. Almas noticed it was similar to the rings of the refugees who had come to his village. Surprised, he asked Tetra where she had hidden it so well. Tetra revealed her ring was made of gold and that it wasn't safe to carry gold all the time, especially when everyone needed money. She had hidden it under a large tree while no one was looking, explaining she had thought of selling it if there was no other way. Almas laughed, saying he didn't blame her and wasn't angry. The impatient king asked them to stop their private conversation. He urged Tetra to bring the ring to him, wanting to examine it. While experts were verifying Tetra's items, Almas continued the meeting with the king in Reborn. Regarding the issue of centralization raised by Almas' king, his answer was to use the power of the people. Centralization is a state form where national power is concentrated at the central government, and it will create the highest centralized power to command the army and collect taxes. For King Rosais, the country is currently divided into many small territories, and to centralize, it's necessary to unite them. But even if the king calls upon the families, it's not certain they will support him. So, it's essential to gradually reduce the political influence of these powerful families. The king asked Almas what he meant by using the strength of the entire army. Almas explained that increasing the political power of the people would mean reducing the influence of the families. The king worried that his power would diminish. Almas acknowledged this reality but said it wasn't important. What mattered was that the king would become the guarantor of the people's rights, their protector against powerful families. Raymond understood the basic issue of governance and the governed. But if it changed as Almas suggested, the dynamic would shift to powerful families versus the royal family and the people. Almas agreed, saying that with this change, if families wanted more political influence, they would have to oppose both forces, and the monarchy would fulfill its mission. The king questioned if the people might also want to increase their political power. Almas thought it possible but believed the likelihood of conflict between the two forces was higher. The influence usually came from the Caristia City League, a republic without a king. While republics vary, for Adelmians, who follow a monarchy, a new republic is truly appealing. Almas believed many in Adelmia were intrigued by republican ideas. The king dismissed this as Almas' prediction. Raymond disagreed with the king, noting that influences like Almas described already existed. The biggest issue they faced was King Firm's uprising, suggesting they had achieved some form of centralized government like Almas aimed for. Despite some opposition, this viewpoint wasn't entirely bad. Raymond, after hearing Almas' presentation, exclaimed that he would adopt him as his son. He continued, shouting that he would be Almas' father from that day on. The king, shocked, asked his brother what he just said, and then temporarily dismissed Almas from the room. Once Almas left, Raymond bluntly stated that he wanted Almas to succeed the throne. Although Almas wasn't the first choice, as a second choice, he wasn't bad. The king disagreed, arguing that Almas, though a genius, was just a commoner and only 16 years old. Raymond directly asked his brother who he intended as the next king. The first candidate would be Raymond, but he had no children. If not, then Yura's husband, which would be terrible as Riga Dibel was the fiancé. Raymond objected, saying choosing a commoner would be better than making that man king. He's nothing but a madman, always after alcohol, money, and women. The king asked if his brother realized that entrusting the country to someone else could lead to division. Raymond disagreed, insisting that victory and the annihilation of the Dibble family would suffice. He again questioned if his brother really wanted to marry his daughter to a man who had killed 2 wives. The king truly didn't want to, but if the wedding went well, the Dibble and Rosice families could ally and execute the centralization plan. Raymond calmly asked if his brother really believed that man would cooperate. The king agreed Rigor wasn't suitable, but questioned why his brother brought another young man into this. Raymond began analyzing. First, Almas had a divine influence as Griffin's son. Second, he possessed excellent qualities beneficial for politics. Third, he understood centralization and how to implement it. Although young, Almas could gain experience and become a good king. The king, frustrated, asked about the union with the Dibble family. Raymond asserted that unification from the start was impossible. Luckily, Almas and Tetra's arrival provided an alternative to continue the previous plan of allying with the Ash family. Even better, both Almas and Tetra were considering marriage, coincidentally aligning with Raymond's plans. Although the Ash family had lost their political power, anyone who married a member of the Ash family would become the adopted son of the king. And Almas, being the son of Griffin, would be a perfect candidate for the position. Raymond was sure that no one would oppose this and happily agreed. The king pondered for a while and agreed to Almas becoming the adopted son of Bolton, but needed more time to think about the throne. Almas was called back and informed that he had become Raymond's son. Returning to the village from the royal palace, Almas heard Lulu's loud cries and hurried to check the situation. Ron reported that Lulu's 2 relatives were persistently trying to approach her. Everyone had gathered to find a solution, but they wouldn't listen. Annoyed, Almas loudly asked if they couldn't leave the girl alone. He scolded them, asking if they didn't see how distressed Lulu was at their presence. Their abandonment of Lulu was unforgivable. Even if Lulu decided to forgive them, it wasn't their decision to make. Almas decided that if this continued, they would be expelled from the village. Bolton, who was nearby, was curious to see how Almas would handle this. Almas told him that with more people in the village, they needed laws and goals. However, if he punished them, it might cause dissatisfaction. If Earl handled it, the issue could be resolved without misunderstandings. Almas asked Bolton for his opinion. Bolton suggested digging a canal around the forest so that if King Firm's soldiers wanted to enter, they would have to cross it. This way, they could defend the village if attacked. Almas curiously asked what Bolton's current military rank was. Bolton calmly stated that he had commanded forces against King Firm for a year. Almas laughed, thinking Bolton only knew how to drink. Bolton clarified that he didn't drink much, he just always carried alcohol with him. Although he was a former army commander, he never crossed the border, but he was still a renowned commander. Almas joked that this still didn't change the image of him as a drunkard. Bolton suggested they have a wooden sword fight together. Almas quickly agreed, considering it a practice for their eventual confrontation with Firm. To his surprise, Bolton was easily knocked back by a single strike from Almas. Bolton kept exclaiming in disbelief, questioning if someone could really be that strong. Almas apologized, noting he hadn't used his full strength. Bolton then remembered Yura saying Almas had many special abilities. Almas helped Bolton up, observing that he remained calm even after witnessing his strength. This meant that in a real battle, it would be hard for Almas to win against Bolton without relying on his innate power. Bolton admitted he had no desire to face Almas again. After the conversation, a group approached Almas, asking to join his army, wanting to fight alongside him. That same day, Yura came to watch Ron and the others train diligently. She informed Almas that his current blessing could enhance the strength of those loyal to him. Though different from the original blessing, it increased physical strength for men and voodoo for women. The fact that Yura is to marry Rigor is known, and the king wants Raymond to refrain from unnecessary talk. Raymond is heartbroken, thinking how deeply the poor girl must be suffering. Any girl would be disappointed to marry a husband who has killed his wife. Raymond argues that if a brother truly wishes for his sister's happiness, he should let her marry the one she loves. However, the king has no other choice at present. Back in the village, Almas, in his spare time, continues to invent various things for military use. Tetra, coming from outside, asks Almas what he's working on. He thinks it's okay to tell her, he's making black powder. Black powder was first made in China and is the earliest form of gunpowder. Almas initially did not want to bring military technology to this world. But the threat from King Firm leaves him no other choice. Almas explains to Tetra that it's made from charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. After explaining, Almas takes Tetra away from his research area as it's still rudimentary and he can't guarantee its safety. Just as they move away, the black powder explodes. Almas tells Tetra that even a small amount can create a loud noise. If put into a suitable container, it can cause injury or even death. But if it's not contained, it's very prone to accidental detonation. Then, just add a bit of pottery shards or metal fragments to complete it. A month later, Almas takes his invention to Bolton, telling him that he's been working on tactics to defeat King Firm. Almas asks if he knows about phalanx, a tactic using shields and spears against the enemy. The left side uses the shield for protection, making the right side weaker, so it's important to have skilled soldiers on that side. Bolton admits that they usually try to support each other, but ultimately, the outcome of a battle depends on luck. Almas then suggests what if cavalry were used to attack both flanks. Bolton acknowledges that Almas's inventions are brilliant. But even so, not everyone can become a knight overnight. Almas remembers that he came not to discuss battles but to show Bolton the black powder. Bolton, astonished at the explosion right before his eyes, asks Almas how he managed to create it. Almas's inventions always seem so grand. Excited, Bolton inquires if it's possible to make more. Almas assures him that, indeed, he can make much more. With this invention, Bolton is confident that they will surely win this battle. Almas cautions him not to be too complacent, as surprises can always occur. Bolton laughs, suggesting that Almas is being overly cautious. Thus, Almas and the villagers continue their preparations for the upcoming battle. 2 more years swiftly pass by. The King of Firm receives news that another clan has defected to the Ash family's side. It has been 2 years since Tetra was found, and the Ash family has begun to recover. The King of Firm is annoyed by the increasing number of rebels but feels fortunate upon hearing that the Rosice kingdom has fallen. He assumes the king must have been ill for a long time, and sees this as a great opportunity. Without a leader, Firm could easily conquer Rosice. A soldier beside the king expresses concern about the lack of complete information. King Firm, angered, questions what he means, asserting that they have been preparing for this war for a long time. Within just 3 days, they plan to raid and plunder Rosice, taking a shortcut through the forest for a surprise attack on the enemy's capital. The others fearfully wonder if this wouldn't provoke the wrath of Griffin. The king dismisses their fears, claiming they have safely traveled through the forest before. The hardest part, he says, was finding a secret path through the forest, revealed thanks to deserters. The people still doubt the king, believing the village is protected by Griffin. The king questions why Griffin did not appear when they took almost all the food last time. If the villagers don't surrender, they will be annihilated. The king believes that either way, they stand to gain. He orders a wizard to scout the forest. The wizard sends a bird spirit into the forest to observe. Just as it's about to return, it gets attacked. The wizard, terrified, wonders why now, fearing they might be under a divine assault. It's only after the third message bird that the wizard realizes something. Eagles typically don't move in groups, and their continuous appearance indicates the magic of a voodoo sorcerer. It's unbelievable that such a small village harbors 3 voodoo sorcerers. Regardless, they must leave quickly now. Soon after, Graham and Lulu successfully capture the birds used for reconnaissance. Lulu is concerned that killing them might provoke Firm. Almas responds that since Firm sent spies, they are already enemies. Almas has informed Earl and the royal court, requesting reinforcements. Just in time, Earl returns to announce that reinforcements will arrive in 3 days. However, Firm's troops have already started moving upon hearing of Rose's fall. There are also movements from neighboring countries and some clans. Earl reads a letter from Raymond to his son. The enemy intends to divide Rosais and create chaos in the capital. He asks Almas to hold the army for 3 days. King Firm, having prepared the troops as requested, says he will gather 3,200 soldiers. His close aides will take 200 to the village. Then, if possible, they will advance to the capital, or at least draw the enemy's attention. King Firm personally will lead 3,000 troops for a frontal assault on the capital. The soldiers worry that mobilizing 32,000 troops means they are committing all their forces, while the enemy could assemble up to 15,000. The king asks if he is worried. To say he isn't would be a lie. The king reveals an interesting fact. He has made a deal with Rigger Dibel to stay out of the war in exchange for the crown of Rosais. This means the second largest force in Rose's capital will not participate in the battle. However, he isn't sure if Rigger might betray them, possibly to gain the trust and gratitude of Rose's people. Whatever happens, the king thinks Rigger will be easy to deal with. Moreover, Rosais is trying to sign an alliance treaty with 2 neighboring countries. According to his sources, they have already sent some troops to the border. While awaiting the treaty, they must still split their forces to guard against unforeseen events. Considering Rigger's non-participation and the troops sent away, he guesses there are at most 4,000 people left in the capital. One person, upon hearing the news, stands up and says that if it's true there's only a 1,000 soldier difference, then their king is sure to win. Everyone is elated, talking about preparing to bake bread in Rosais for the celebration. Soon after, Alma spots 200 soldiers advancing towards the village from the watchtower, exactly as Soyen had reported earlier. The villagers worry about what to do next. Someone even suggests having Lulu transform into an eagle to attack them. Almas tells everyone to calm down, reminding them that they are protected by ramparts and a moat. He advises everyone to stay calm and stick to the plan. Almas realizes that King Firm isn't among the approaching group. The leader is probably just a commander. The leader demands Almas to open the gates and hand over all their food. After Almas refuses, the enemy troops immediately attack. Initially, the enemy falls into a trap set by the village, but no one else falls for it afterward. Continuous arrow fire from the enemy prevents the villagers from launching an effective counterattack. Graham's position for shooting arrows is also discovered, and he is constantly under attack from enemy stone throwers. The enemy's shields protect them from harm, putting the villagers in a difficult situation. Many villagers have already been injured. Almas orders the wounded to be taken to safety. Ron continues throwing stones at them without stop. Soyen realizes that the village's attacks are ineffective, and the enemy continues to freely shoot arrows. It's been 2 days since the king of Rosais fell ill. The entire castle is in turmoil, with no good news reported. After reading a letter, Raymond angrily tears it up, cursing Rigger as a wretch. Rigger hasn't sent a single soldier, just hoarding his forces in his own territory. Raymond knows he is seizing this opportunity for his political advantage. He then realizes that this is also an opportunity for them. If they can get through this without Rigger's help, his position will definitely be weakened later. At that moment, a soldier enters to report news from Almas. Somehow, Almas has turned the tide. He not only defeated King Firm's troops who took the shortcut through the forest but also captured the enemy general. No one in the village lost their life, though some were injured. On the enemy side, there were 180 casualties. Raymond is so astounded by the news he keeps asking the soldier to repeat it. He had only expected his son to buy them some time, but never imagined such a success. Almas is summoned to report the situation. Raymond informs his son that currently, they can only muster over 3,000 troops, which isn't much different from the enemy's numbers. However, Firm is a military genius, so they might not win if the forces are equal. Almas deduces that Firm is someone who doesn't fight unless he is sure of winning. Raymond decides to appoint his son as the commander, instructing him to defeat King Firm. It's been 2 years since he adopted Almas, who has learned much about military tactics. Raymond says he'll assign Bolton as the commander to accompany Almas. The two will make decisions together on the battlefield. Raymond doesn't want his inexperienced son making decisions alone. He laughs, saying he isn't foolish enough to let his young son make country-affecting decisions. Almas accepts, mentioning that some friends from his village also want to join. Raymond smiles, saying Almas needs guards, so it's fine. Raymond will stay in command from there. Almas prepares himself and his troops immediately. Before leaving, Raymond orders his son not to die out there. On their way, Bolton, riding beside Almas, constantly asks if his legs are cold. Almas, seriously, tells him to stop joking, he's really worried. Bolton reassures Almas, telling him to leave the command to him. Someone else nearby tells Almas to just relax and put his feet up on the horse's saddle. Bolton whispers to Almas that all the soldiers are worried, not just him. They wonder why Griffin's son is just a kid and not a strong man. Later, the forces of Almas and Firm are both advancing towards each other. Almas tells Bolton that he may not be able to command, but he can still fight, so he wants to be on the front lines. Bolton scolds him, reminding him of Raymond's instruction not to put his son in danger. Almas says he understands his father's temperament but asks for permission this time. After some thought, Bolton agrees, thinking it should be okay. With Almas's strength, defeating the enemy with just a swing of his spear seems feasible. Tetra approaches and takes Almas's hand, urging him not to do anything foolish. Soyen steps forward, reporting that she has seen the enemy, and they are an hour's march away. Bolton praises her, affirming that she is indeed a skilled sorcerer, and Almas made a great choice by becoming Raymond's adopted son. Now, he has excellent sorcerers and warriors by his side. Annoyed, Almas tells him not to regard them as gifts that came naturally, emphasizing their hard work and training. Looking at the sky, Bolton remarks that today's battle seems inevitable and softly tells everyone to ensure their safety. As Firm's troops approach, Almas is surprised by their advanced equipment. Bolton calmly explains that this is Firm's way of commanding, always keeping his soldiers on edge with the threat of combat or starvation. Almas worries that if this tactic is effective, it could be troublesome. Tetra notes that both sides have cavalry, but the enemy seems much larger in number, especially compared to the attack on the village. Almas reassures everyone, saying their previous attack on the village allowed them to gain more warriors. People behind start urging Almas to issue the battle command. Almas shouts loudly to get into formation as per the plan. Tetra, confused, asks what plan he's referring to. Almas calmly replies that there isn't one, he just shouted to fit the role of a commander. Bolton laughs, thinking Almas already knew the plan, which he himself had devised 2 years ago. He encourages everyone to show the results of their 2 years of training. The enemy quickly gets a hold of Almas's formation. King Firm finds it odd that so many troops are concentrated on the right flank. It seems Rosais wants a direct frontal assault. Another person guesses Rosais aims to crush the elite troops on the right flank. Firm laughs heartily, finding the strategy interesting. He remarks that if that's all they have, it won't be easy to try a new tactic against someone as cunning as him. The right flank is simply weaker than the other positions. It may seem vulnerable from the outside, but it's not easy to penetrate. Firm whispers confidently that they are sure to win this time. The clash between the two armies officially begins. Rhea, riding forward, leads an attack on the enemy's cavalry. The enemy troops, underestimating her because she's just a girl, mockingly ask if she wants to be beaten. One of them moves forward to confront Rhea, intending to stop her rampage. Rose follows closely behind, cautioning Rhea to be careful. He tells her to fall back and leave the front lines to him. Soon, the enemy realizes that Rose is incredibly strong. One of them shouts that they are too powerful, and they can't stand against both Rhea and Rose. Almas, watching from a distance, continuously praises their efforts, noting that things are progressing well. At this rate, they can easily control the enemy's cavalry. Those loyal to Almas are increasing their physical strength. Almas believes that just the two of them can control the situation on the left flank. A soldier rushes to Almas, reporting that the enemy's infantry is approaching. Almas orders the use of explosive spears. These spears are fitted with black powder and magical paper to detonate on impact. After using them to defend the village, only 10 are left. Almas considers this just the first secret weapon to be used. Although few in number, they will surely cause confusion among the enemy. King Firm, bewildered by the continuous explosions and his soldiers being blown into the air, wonders what weapons Almas's side is using. Some guess that Almas has exceptionally strong frontline warriors. Firm orders to continue defending the front lines, unsure of the mysterious happenings but confident that their formation won't be easily broken by such attacks. Firm is determined to win this battle, directing to divide his troops, with some defending the front and the rest flanking Almas's forces from both sides. He believes that by surrounding them, they can defeat Almas's army regardless of the strength of their left flank. Almas, realizing the dire situation, declares that he won't let them flank. Taking up a shield, he moves towards them, proclaiming that he won't allow them to pass. Firm quickly recognizes him as the leader of the village's youngsters. Almas shouts that he is indeed Griffin's son and Raymon's adopted son, the protector of Tetra and her fiancé. Almas continues shouting loudly that he is also the supreme commander of the army, knowing that this will draw the enemy's attention. King Firm realizes that killing Almas would lead to victory and orders his men to do so. Almas yells defiantly that no one will come near him as he possesses the strength of an emperor's blessing and will not be easily defeated. This successfully distracts the enemy troops, allowing Rhea and Rose to quietly decimate their cavalry. By the time Firm realizes, it's too late. Almas and Firm engage in direct combat. Almas urges him to fight and then attacks. To everyone's surprise, Almas manages to block a strike from Firm. Firm comments on how terrifying it is but says it won't matter if Almas can't perform on the battlefield. When it's his turn to attack, Firm loudly questions if Almas thinks he can win with just that strength. Almas replies that his spear would break if he used his full strength, so he is holding back. Internally, Almas thinks that if it were Bolton, that attack would have sent Firm flying. He realizes he needs a different strategy to counter Firm's spear. After changing his shield, Almas finds it makes no significant difference. Firm can still predict his moves. Almas decides to stay defensive, waiting for an opportunity. Firm attacks again, catching Almas off guard. Firm reveals he has been observing Almas's fighting style, noting that his skills are not perfect, but just one aspect is strong. The king solemnly declares that Almas has no chance of winning. Almas acknowledges the current situation as Firm describes but thinks of something that could turn the tide. Firm attacks again, asking why Almas freezes up during battle. This attack takes Almas by surprise, forcing him to use all his strength and break his spear. Firm pauses and tells Almas to find a new weapon. Almas asks if he's sure, warning that Firm might regret it. In a one-on-one battle, Firm doesn't want to win by advantage. He wants a fair victory to boost his soldiers' morale. A sword is thrown to Almas from outside. He decides to use it, realizing this is his opportunity. Firm had the upper hand in the battle due to his superior technique and observation of Almas's spear skills. However, Almas is confident that Firm is unaware of his swordsmanship. This could be his chance to turn the tables. Almas loudly challenges King Firm to start again. Noticing the difference in length between the sword and spear, Firm tries to maintain a safe distance, but Almas quickly closes the gap. Firm curses at Almas's astonishing speed. Almas kindly explains that he is using foot techniques from Kendo, which are not easy to move around on the ground. Even though he explains, Firm couldn't possibly understand. Despite Firm's attempts to create distance using a shield, Almas knows he may not match Firm in command and strategy, but his strength is enough to prevent Firm from escaping. Almas uses all his might to thrust through the shield and easily defeats Firm. Before dying, Firm weakly tells Almas he must take responsibility for killing him. He dreams of unifying half the island and asks Almas to continue his legacy. Firm wishes Almas to become a great king, remembered in history, and let his name be the first to fall by Almas's hand. Finally, He asks Almas to ensure Tetra's happiness, the only person he ever forgave. Firm says much before dying, but if Almas is to be remembered in history, he will acknowledge Firm as a genius, a man even Griffin feared. Around him, everyone begins celebrating their commander's victory over King Firm. Almas shouts to focus back on the battle. They are still on the battlefield. Ron, wielding a sword, loudly proclaims that the enemy leader has been defeated. Good news follows, with reports of crushing the enemy's right wing. Soyen points in the direction where the enemy is fleeing. Bolton laughs, praising Almas's brilliance, and as the team captain, he orders the troops to clean up the battlefield. And so, the army of the defeated king is annihilated to the last man. King Firm had deployed all his troops for the battle, leaving his capital defenseless. Almas's forces advanced on the capital without any resistance and captured King Firm's castle without shedding any blood. In the aftermath, Bolton, still exhilarated, loudly praises Almas's exceptional movements and attacks, and even brings out a bottle of wine to celebrate their victory. Almas looks around at his people, feeling happy that everyone is safe. He then smiles at Bolton, joking about his quickness to bring out the wine. The castle, originally belonging to Lagos, is seen as reclaimed on this day. Bolton remarks that they have fulfilled Lagos's final wish. Almas gazes at Tetra's homeland, and as the villagers arrive, he runs to embrace Tetra, relieved that no one from the village was killed. Wherever Almas's people go, the citizens cheer. Lulu comments that it seems like the whole country is celebrating. The people are overjoyed to hear of the fall of King Firm's empire. Tetra, riding with Almas, urges him to acknowledge the people's greetings. No one had expected that the person who brought victory to their homeland would personally bring the enemy's head back. Bolton shouts to the people, asking if Almas has delivered more than what they had hoped for. The next task is to decide what to do with Firm's territory. It depends on who will be the next leader to prevent any seeds of rebellion. The people want Tetra to inherit Firm's lands, as it originally belonged to the Lagos Ash family. Within just a month, the citizens of Firm's kingdom submit to the Rosais Empire. Meanwhile, the king of Rosais recovers from his illness without complications. Everything goes smoothly, and the wedding day of Almas and Tetra arrives. The ceremony is blessed by everyone. The final part involves receiving blessings from various families. A soldier brings a gift, announcing that a particular family could not attend. Almas recognizes it as a gift from the Dibel family, who did not come to the wedding. The Dibels opposed the annexation of Firm's territory. The Dibel family's gift to Almas and Tetra suggests that they do not oppose the wedding, even if they are against the annexation of Firm's territory. Almas wonders about the Dibel family's stance. After examining all the gifts, Tetra asks Almas if he wants to join the celebration with everyone else. Almas declines, saying he enjoys sitting there with her, watching the people below. He reflects on their journey from the Ramalia forest and credits everyone's efforts for their success. Meanwhile, the king of Rosais is furious. He reproaches his brother, Raymond, for his actions during the king's unconsciousness. Raymond defends himself, saying he took on the burden of ruling in the king's absence. The king expresses his irritation but acknowledges that due to Raymond's decisions, Almas has become a hero. He believes the Ash family will be stable with Almas as a leader and instructs Raymond to inform Yura to prepare for her wedding. In another development, Simai joyfully arrives in Kralis, the world's most famous trading city. The gatekeeper informs him that the city is free to enter, as fees only apply to merchants. However, if Simai plans to stay for more than a month, he will need to pay taxes. The gatekeeper kindly warns Simai about two types of people in Claris, those who pay taxes and those who do not, advising him to avoid the latter group. Upon entering the city, Simai accidentally helps a girl named Ismia, passionate about architecture, catch a thief. The two strike a connection and find a restaurant to chat. Simai shares his dream of reaching the end of the ocean, fulfilling his parents' dream. Conveniently, their destination is not far from the trading city. Ismia asks to join Simai, explaining that there are too many architects in the city, and as a woman, she sees no opportunity to showcase her talent. However, In an undeveloped place like their destination, she believes she will have more chances to demonstrate her abilities. During the King of Roses' unconscious state, Raymond convened a meeting to discuss the Ash family's territory. He proposed handing over authority to his son, Almas. Everyone agreed that entrusting Almas was a wise decision. Rigor, however, angrily accused Raymond of abusing his power. He questioned how Raymond could give such important land to someone whose origins were unknown. Raymond calmly explained that Almas, his adopted son, had defeated Firm on the battlefield, unlike Rigor, who cowardly withdrew his troops to his territory and merely watched others fight. Rigor countered, questioning Almas's status before he was adopted, labeling him an orphan. Raymond retorted, asking how Almas could be parentless when he is Griffin's son. He assured Rigor that Almas would be well supported, having the backing of Balmon, the military advisor, and Boros, the affairs advisor. Moreover, the peace in the land was thanks to Almas's recent battle. Raymond called for a vote, which infuriated Rigor, who inwardly cursed Raymond for swaying everyone's opinion just because he was the king's brother. Belmet, sitting nearby, advised Rigor to remain calm, believing the king had only 2 years left. He suggested that once the king passed away, Raymond would lose his influence, and the throne would likely go to Rigor, especially since he was engaged to Yura. Rigor then asked Belmet if he would support him, to which Belmet replied that his life's commitment was to serve the Dibel family, the strongest among the clans and likely to have the next king. However, Belmet cautioned Rigor about Almas. Rigor dismissed Almas's victory as luck, confident he could do the same. He vowed to crush Almas if necessary, though Belmet warned only to do so as a last resort and to proceed cautiously. In a conversation with his brother, the King of Roses expressed shock at Raymond's ruthless decisions made during his unconsciousness. The story continues with Raymond pleading with his brother to allow Almas and Yura to hold their wedding as soon as possible. The king fears that a civil war between Roses, Ash, and the Dibel clan may erupt afterward. According to the king, if Rigor becomes the next king and Almas is in a lesser position, at least they can avoid a civil war. Raymond, heartbroken, expresses his pity for his niece Yura, having to marry a man who killed his own wife. After much persuasion, the king agrees to his brother's decision, but on the condition that Almas must genuinely respect and want to be king and marry Yura. He must also be willing to get his hands bloodied in the civil war. In Almas village, people prepare to move to Ash's territory. However, many who were already there and the new refugees choose to stay in the village. Earl says it would be a lie to say he doesn't remember Almas, but he will spend the rest of his life repaying Almas' kindness. He comments that it would be great to have Earl by his side, but after all, both Rumalia Forest and this place are their territory. Therefore, Earl decides to stay in the village and take over Almas' role in caring for the people who remain. Soyen expresses her surprise that all the refugees have chosen to stay, as she thought they would return to their homeland. Tetra, however, is not surprised, pointing out that life in Almas village is more comfortable than in any other country. Almas now plans to develop the territory of the Ash clan into a beautiful nation. Almas smiles, saying it's not just his responsibility, but everyone's. He first asks Boros what he should do in his position. Boros, as his advisor, tells him not to be formal and explains that the essentials include maintaining order, protecting the territory, and preventing voodoo magic. He then adds that Almas will also need to handle judgments and the taxes they must pay to the King of Roses. Almas quietly complains about the multitude of tasks. Boros reassures him, saying the work isn't easy but it's manageable. For example, judgments can be fairly made based on local culture. Moreover, Almas won't be alone in this. He will have the support of Boros and Balton. Balton chimes in, saying he will take care of maintaining peace and order, while Boros will handle the laws and judgments. And, of course, Almas can change who handles various tasks in the future as he wishes. Balton informs Almas that the next major task is to rejuvenate this land. King Firm has drained its life to the point of exhaustion, and they need to infuse new energy into it. Almas remarks that revival under a fledgling leader like himself will undoubtedly be difficult. However, Almas is the one who defeated King Fern. He silently complains about the numerous responsibilities left by the former king but acknowledges the need to fulfill his duties. They need money for everything, and there seems to be no choice but to increase taxes. Yet, raising taxes will undoubtedly make the restoration work even more challenging. Bolton admits it's a tough decision but a necessary one. Almas interjects, asking if this country initially had a tax system. He's certain that the tax experts have likely turned the revenue into their personal wealth, affecting at least half the country. Almas decides the first step is to conduct a population survey. By clarifying the exact amount of tax revenue collectible from the populace, they can minimize losses. Almas devises a paper form for the population survey. This form will record essential details like age, gender, and economic status of each individual in the territory. Someone steps forward, noting they don't have enough people fluent in Carishian. They have only Tetra and less than 10 others. Almas realizes that the lack of literacy is why a population survey hasn't existed before, making tax collection a complex issue. Almas instructs them to use a standard form where people only need to enter numbers. He's confident that even for those who are illiterate, filling in numbers is incredibly simple. Tetra asks if they have to do all this manually, which would be a tremendous task. Almas smiles and replies that they won't. Instead, they will use woodblock printing to accomplish this massive task. It's like making a large stamp. They just need to carve characters onto a wooden block, apply ink, and press it onto paper. Ron and Rose both agree that this method is doable. The next issue is the tax rate. Due to Firm's rule, Ash's territory has become a desolate land. Almas believes they can only impose a low tax rate. A tax of 10% on harvest yield will serve as the land and labor tax, while personal income tax will be abolished. Boros, standing nearby, exclaims that it's a bold move. Implementing personal tax, although it provides a stable income for the government, places a tremendous burden on the citizens. However, by replacing it, we can collect a substantial amount of tax from landowners. Coercion or forced collection won't yield good results. He wants the citizens, who are brave enough to take risks and reap rewards, to focus on reviving this land. Bolton agrees, but reminds him that reviving a nation also requires funds. Almas plans to distribute widely the tools they've manufactured, including rice threshers. However, this may result in many farmers losing their jobs. Nevertheless, he will provide subsidies to them while still increasing the capital income from the paper production industry. Additionally, this will provide more labor to expand other industries. Almas then puts off the introduction of rice crop rotation for later. Next, he will teach people how to distill alcohol. Bolton's eyes light up at the mention of alcohol. He's the first to try the drink made by Almas. Almas explains that brewing alcohol requires very specialized equipment, but currently, they only have one. So, they need to find blacksmiths to make more. Boros mentions that there aren't many smiths here skilled in ironworking, but they do have some who can work with copper. Almas smiles and says copper will do. He pauses and then mentions that the remaining issue is finding buyers and investors. But Almas has a solution, so the financial issues can be set aside. Boros responds, surprised by Almas' intention to lower taxes, and laughs, saying that Almas is indeed beyond expectation. Almas states that now all issues are resolved, they will move on to the military matter. Almas begins the final topic of the day, which is the military issue. He admits to himself that he really doesn't know much about this area. In the battle with King Fern, he was just a nominal commander. He calls on Bolton and asks for his opinion on the matter, joking that since he's had some drink, it's time to get to work. Bolton laughs and says he'll present his views. First, since Almas became the leader of this land, it is his responsibility and mission to protect the land and its people. In addition to sweeping out criminals within the territory and preventing external forces from invading, Almas recognizes the need for a strong military force. He thinks to himself that although different in scale, this isn't much different from his time in the village. They need weapons, but first and foremost, they need soldiers. Ron asks what they will do about the soldiers. Almas suggests they first summarize the current situation. While they don't have a regular army, there aren't many people capable of fighting either. Besides those present here, there are a few dozen in the village who can fight, but that's not a lot in reality. The most immediate threat is the kingdom of Demorser, adjacent to the kingdom of Rosais. The Rosais king expects Ash to act as a shield against Demorser. Almas inquires about the current military strength of that kingdom. After some thought, Bolton replies that they have around 50,000 soldiers. However, due to their large territory and many enemies, they can't deploy all their forces in an attack, so only about 10,000 to 20,000 soldiers would be available. Tetra recalls that in the battle with Firm, they had 3,000 soldiers without any issue. Bolton suggests that they could still recruit more soldiers in the future. A sufficient force could be gathered, especially if a general mobilization order is issued in the event of a war. Bolton assures Almas not to worry, as this region has often been at war, so the army will be well trained. Almas understands but says if war comes unexpectedly, it will be a different story. He thinks it's best to have a standing army. Didn't King Firm have about 300 soldiers? Boros asks what Almas thinks about the soldiers who served under Firm. After his death, they lost their jobs and have nowhere to go. Almas ponders that for them, he must be a target of revenge for killing their king. But ignoring them could lead to unrest. After some thought, Almas decides to go along with Boros' suggestion. As for weapons, Almas wants to accumulate more funds before discussing further. He orders everyone to increase the stockpile of gunpowder, as it's not easy to produce. It would be too late to start making it only when it's needed. Almas suggests they should also strengthen everything they can, like finances and magical circles. Hearing this, Tetra says she will take care of the magical circles. They need to start preparing everything right away. A few days later, Almas and 3 others set off for the bustling commercial city of Claris, far busier than Rosais. This trip's first goal is to find a patron for their wine and paper products. The second is to secure funds for the nation's reconstruction. Ron, puzzled, asks if earning money and getting money aren't the same. Almas explains that the income from selling paper and distilling wine won't be enough for the reconstruction efforts, hence his plan to borrow a significant sum. Graham, standing nearby, expresses concern about this strategy. Almas reassures him that it's within their repayment capability and that having more capital for bigger ventures will be more profitable. Graham wonders why not borrow from the king of Rosais instead. Almas explains that the kingdom of Rosais hasn't fully recovered from economic difficulties, and not many people can afford luxury items like paper and wine. Almas tells them not to worry about negotiations, as the king of Rosais has introduced them to a merchant in Claris. Their current task is to negotiate with him, hoping he won't try to take advantage of them right from the start. Upon meeting Ines, the merchant quickly gets to the point and asks to see what they want to sell. Almas presents the paper and explains its use for writing information, a more practical alternative to papyrus or parchment. Ines, intrigued, asks if he can write on it. Almas assures him with a smile, offering all the sample papers for his use. Ines suggests that compared to the price of papyrus, he could sell it for double. However, to quickly recover the investment, he wonders if Almas could increase production and sell it at the same price as papyrus. Almas considers it a good deal, realizing that just capturing a portion of the papyrus market would yield significant profits. Regarding the wine, after tasting, Ines compliments its strength, saying it's unlike anything he's tried before. He suggests selling it for 20 times the usual price. Almas counters with at least 30 times the price. Surprisingly, Ines agrees easily, with a knowing smile. Almas doesn't fully understand the smile but acknowledges that it's hard to outwit an experienced merchant. Regarding the loan, Tetra presents a paper showing the amount of money the people of Ash can generate. Currently, Almas wants to borrow 3 times that amount. Ines proposes that if Almas can agree to lower the price of the paper until the debt is fully repaid, he will grant the loan. Almas agrees to this arrangement. He knows Ines believes that as long as they can make a small profit from selling paper, even if the loan isn't repaid quickly, they will still earn additional income. A few weeks have passed since Almas became the lord of the Ash clan's territory. Ron and Soyen are in charge of collecting taxes from the people. The village chief brings out 4 large bags, stating that they represent this year's taxes. Ron asks the elder to wait as he will verify the amount. Surprised, the elder asks why he is being checked, noting that it's his first time undergoing such scrutiny. The tax is supposed to be 10% of the income, but the bags appear too little for the size of this land. Soyen reports that after checking, they are missing at least 10 more bags like these. Ron angrily confronts the village chief, asking if this is all, questioning the discrepancy. The village chief laughs and insists he has handed over everything. Ron, enraged, orders the elder to be detained, as he refuses to admit any wrongdoing. Despite being arrested, the elder still demands proof of his guilt. Ron presents statistical papers, noting that the yield reported by the elder is too low, and there have been no reports of crop failure. Soyen finds a secret cellar under the village chief's house, filled with hidden wheat. Ron confronts him about the embezzlement, a severe crime. The village chief defends his actions, saying that collecting taxes is risky, and he was merely rewarding himself a small portion. He praises Ron for being a good person and offers him a share to keep the matter quiet. Soyen, standing nearby, adds the crime of bribery to the elder's charges, amounting to a total of 70 lashes. The elder, now desperate, pleads for mercy. Ron, infuriated, tells him to beg for mercy from the Lord himself. Upon returning to Ash Castle, Ron and Soyen meet Earl, who has also just arrived. Soyen shares with Earl about their encounter with a nobleman trying to bribe them. She expresses frustration, noting that this is already the 12th such incident. Inside, Almas acknowledges the hard work of Ron and Soyen. Despite only collecting 10% of the grain, they managed to gather a substantial amount. With the population census conducted across the territory, they are now able to collect enough taxes to support the government, and the current tax burden on farmers is more reasonable than before. In addition, the Uniform Equipment Initiative is progressing well. Bolton reports that they have been able to purchase quality steel with the money borrowed from mines, allowing them to start producing rice threshing machines, which will be sold or rented to those in need. The farmers, with the help of advanced tools, can now cultivate wastelands, and the yield is increasing. After completing his report, Bolton reminds Almas that the Golden Moon Festival is approaching. The Golden Moon Festival is a major event in Rosice, where the nobility gather, and naturally, Rigger Dibble is interested in it. Almas acknowledges the event, stating that it would be best to avoid any conflict, but they should still prepare well for it. Unlike Ron, Rose is assigned the task of announcing the military recruitment throughout the country. The announcement causes concern among the people, with some asking if a war is imminent and others protesting, citing their farming responsibilities. Rose clarifies that the recruitment is voluntary, not mandatory, and only men aged between 15 and 30 are eligible. The soldiers will be paid in wheat, and the Lord will provide weapons, so there's no need for them to buy their own. The primary duties will be to guard the Lord's residence and prevent crime. Recruits will live in a house near the castle and train daily. Soldiers will not be dismissed unexpectedly unless they are disabled or seriously ill. However, a pension will be provided upon retirement. Rose adds that those interested should inform the village chief within 2 weeks, with 300 being selected. If there are more applicants than spots, a competition will be held. A villager asks if they choose not to enlist, they don't have to register, right? This is good news for those busy with agricultural work. Another person from the crowd, a former elite guard of King Firm, inquires if he could be recruited if he signs up. Rose answers affirmatively, stating that anyone with the skills and passion is always welcome. Rose announces loudly for all to hear that irrespective of social status, anyone willing to join is welcome. When the recruitment results came in, the number of registrants was double the initial expectation. Almas was surprised but pleased. Most of Firm's soldiers were conscripted, primarily from peasant backgrounds. After gaining their freedom and returning home, they found their fields taken over. Now jobless, this recruitment was a welcome opportunity for them. Almas feared that if not enlisted, they might turn to crime. Ron expresses concern about whether they have the resources to support the increased number of soldiers, especially since the farmers had just been relieved of their tax burden and the soldiers were being hired, not conscripted. Ron asks again if everything will be alright. Almas, with a smile, commends Ron for not only worrying about the job but also considering the economy. He assures everyone that although they aren't excessively wealthy, the economy isn't bad. He asks Ron if he knows why the economy was so terrible under King Fern. He relied solely on agriculture for income. In contrast, Almas has diversified income sources, listing paper sales, wine, and taxes. With the soldiers' arrangement settled, Almas begins selecting commanders. He approaches Rose to assign him as the cavalry commander and to manage the slaves about to be transferred. Rose initially refuses, wondering why him and not Boros, who is more experienced. Almas explains that Boros has never commanded cavalry and, like Rose, comes from a humble background. Moreover, Rose is the best horse rider Almas knows and has a great relationship with Rhea. For these reasons, Rose is the perfect fit for the job. Almas jokingly suggests Rose should seize the opportunity to marry Rhea, as he can communicate with her in Germanese. Almas concludes that Ron will be responsible for the infantry, and Graham will take care of the archers. Rose accepts the role, promising to do his best. A few days later, 100 horses are delivered. Tetra, who had placed the order, is delighted to see them, impressed by their grandeur. Ines dismounts from a horse, expressing his honor to meet them again. Almas replies that he is the one honored and didn't expect Ines to come personally. After Rose goes to count the horses, Ines starts handing over the slaves. He explains they are war slaves, carefully selected for their quality. Almas asks Rhea to translate for the slaves, welcoming them and announcing himself as their new master. One of the slaves, hearing this, loudly demands food. Rhea is taken aback by his boldness. Almas, unfazed, instructs Tetra to prepare some food. He also announces that the slaves will be given the opportunity to bathe and clean themselves. Once preparations are complete, Rose informs them that he is their manager and that they will be fighting in the cavalry unit. He assures them that good performance could lead to their freedom. The defiant slave from earlier steps forward, agreeing to work hard but demanding to meet someone who has actually gained their freedom. Rhea points to herself, saying she has been freed. Vuger, the defiant slave, refuses to obey someone weaker than himself and challenges Rose's authority. Rose agrees that if Vuger can defeat him in combat, he will earn his freedom, otherwise, he must obey. Rhea quickly informs Almas about the situation. Everyone gathers to watch the contest. Rose easily wins, stunning the onlookers with his swift and efficient combat skills. Almas explains that Rose dodged the opponent's blow and then counterattacked. Ines acknowledges that an ordinary person couldn't have performed such a feat. Almas thinks to himself that Rose's balance, aided by the stepping stone, and the extraordinary abilities from the Emperor's blessing played a part. Inside the castle, Soyen greets Almas and Tetra happily upon their return. Almas informs her that Rose is doing well with the cavalry training. He mentions that both the military and political situations are stabilizing, and they just need to wait for the festival day. Soyen reports that a young couple is seeking an audience with Almas but lacks any identification. Almas, now a lord, expresses concern about meeting strangers who might pose a threat to his safety. Soyen suggests to Almas that they could send the two visitors away, but she personally finds them interesting and thinks they should meet them. Almas, curious, asks why. Soyen explains that the woman is an architect and the man is an explorer from the Scarlet Empire, and the woman wishes to work as an architect. Soyen believes they currently lack such talent. Almas agrees, acknowledging the need for such individuals. The man, a self-proclaimed world explorer, claims to have traversed the entire continent. Almas invites them to his study for a meeting. Ismia, the architect, introduces herself to Almas and demonstrates her ability to design any structure, presenting a sketch of a building. She mentions her expertise in houses and bridges and her capability to design siege engines like catapults or ballistae. Almas questions why they chose his small country, given their talents. Izmia candidly admits that every kingdom she approached rejected her. Almas realizes that instead of being a commoner in a large kingdom, she prefers to establish her career in his smaller country before someone else recognizes her talent. Preferring to be a big fish in a small pond rather than a small fish in a big pond, Almas decides not to hire her immediately but wants to see her skills first. He assigns her a task, promising accommodation and official employment based on the outcome. Izmia is grateful for the opportunity and vows not to disappoint him. Turning to Saimai, the explorer, Almas encourages him to introduce himself. Saimai explains he comes from a distant empire in the west, known as the Land of Silk. He recently completed his quest to find the end of the world and wishes to document his journey in a book. However, traditional materials like sheepskin and papyrus are too expensive for him. He discovered the paper from Almas's kingdom and believes it to be the best material for his book. Almas, sensing an opportunity for publicity, agrees to provide the paper, with the condition that he be the first to see the completed book. Almas, following the plan, heads to the capital of the kingdom of Roseis to participate in the festival. Tetra, curiously looking around, asks him if this is indeed the Star Festival. Almas scans the area and comments that it's even more crowded than at their wedding ceremony last time. Raymond, standing at the gate, warmly welcomes his son, noting it's been a long time since they last met. Almas points to large barrels, mentioning he brought celebratory wine. Before leaving, he reminds his father not to drink too much, as the wine is quite strong. Raymond assures him he will warn the others. He then directs them to where the powerful families are gathering. After arranging to talk with his son later, Raymond quickly departs. Tetra, observing the crowd, wonders if this area is where the influential families gather. They even spot some people from their wedding day. Almas, with a smile, tells Tetra that their aim today is to make more allies, so they should be friendly. Tetra adds that they should still keep a distance from a man named Rigger. Currently, their territories are adjacent to Rigger's, but there's no reason to start a conflict. Almas brings 2 drinks, asking Tetra which one she wants. Meanwhile, Tetra notices many children attending the party with their parents. She turns to ask him which he prefers first. Almas, puzzled, asks what she means. Children, do you want a son or a daughter first? Almas, taken aback, asks why she would suddenly ask that. He says it doesn't really matter to him, if it's a daughter first, having a son afterward is fine too. Tetra thinks a son would grow up to be a warrior more quickly, so a son might be better. Almas laughs, saying if Tetra thinks so, he has no objections. He jests that if they have a son first, they should have a daughter next. Tetra then asks Almas what he plans after that. Almas, amused, asks if she plans to have a whole bunch of kids. He's not sure, but as long as the gender balance isn't too skewed, it's fine. Almas suggests they leave this topic for later, as they are still at the party. They decide to find something to eat first. At this point, a group of people approach Almas, asking him to tell the story of his battle with King Firm. Remembering King Firm, Almas recalls his last words about making her happy. Almas thinks, despite carrying a heavy message, he also desires Tetra's happiness. Almas affirms that his love for Tetra will never change. A girl in the crowd asks if Almas still doesn't have an heir, right? Other girls chime in, suggesting it would be better if he had someone else to take care of. Almas, upon realizing that the girls around are interested in becoming his second wife, finds himself surrounded by a crowd. Pushed to the outskirts, Tetra pulls Almas out, saying she wants to introduce him to a dish they don't have in their region. Almas, freed from the crowd, continuously thanks his wife. Tetra looks at Almas and says that if he wants to marry again, she won't stop him. But he must ensure that it doesn't break their family's happiness. Almas replies, knowing she can always joke about anything. While they are still talking, Rigger arrives at the party. Tetra, spotting him first, whispers under her breath about his ostentation, questioning why bring so many attendants. A kind person behind them alerts Almas that the man is Rigger. Rigger, upon reaching them, laughs heartily, expressing his delight at meeting Almas and Tetra and congratulating them on their marriage again. Seeing Rigger extend his hand, Almas shakes it, thinking he's friendlier than expected. Rigger apologizes for not attending their wedding, claiming he rarely gets sick but unfortunately fell ill on their big day. As he says this, he grips Almas's hand tightly. Almas, maintaining a smile, expresses his regret, while discreetly twisting Rigger's hand to advise him to take care of his health. Rigger, in pain, lets go and starts cursing loudly at Almas, attracting the attention of many. Ron's men arrive just as Rigger leaves. Almas advises Ron not to get provoked and to be careful as they are easily surrounded when together. Yura then greets Almas and Tetra. Looking across the room, they see Rigger, now flirting with several girls. Almas thinks that after the people at Griffin's orphanage, Yura is the one he wants to spend the most time with. He wishes to see her as happy as Tetra. Even though he likes Yura, she has a fiancé, and he is married. Before leaving, Yura slips a piece of paper into his hand, asking him to meet her where they first met. Before going to that shop, Almas deliberately brings a lot of herbs, something Yura often buys. During their meeting that day, Yura confesses her desire to marry Almas. However, the inevitability of civil war couldn't be avoided. Almas couldn't make a decision immediately and asked for 2 days to think. Leaving the shop, he rushed home to see Tetra. He told her that he had just met with Yura and immediately knelt before her to apologize. He knew he couldn't deceive her, Tetra was too intelligent. And Almas sincerely wanted to apologize for his infidelity. Tetra stood for a while, then sat down in front of Almas, stating that she was his wife. A wife has less power than her husband, the head of the family. She also had no right to oppose his final decision. Almas asked Tetra to share her true feelings. He didn't want to force his wife. Tetra said she loved Almas, a man who always made wise decisions, and she trusted that everything would be fine under his arrangement. She understood that people sometimes lack decisiveness, which was perfectly normal. But she didn't want him to shift his decisions onto others. Tetra stated that Almas should decide about Yura himself and not worry about her. Deep in the Ramalia forest, Almas decided to seek Griffin. He recounted all the ongoing events to him. After a while, Griffin understood that Almas wanted to marry Yura. However, Yura was the daughter of a boss, meaning marrying her would require Almas to take the boss's position. As a newcomer in the group, many would oppose his leadership, potentially leading to war. Almas agreed but asked Griffin to choose his words carefully. Griffin, unconcerned, asked if Almas would follow his advice. Almas clarified he didn't come for decisions but for counsel. Griffin said if Almas wanted to marry Yura, then he should. What's the problem? Almas highlighted that this could lead to war, potentially harming his friends. Griffin stated that whether they help Almas depends on them, he needn't worry. Griffin didn't understand why Almas was concerned about conflict within the group, asking if winning was necessary. Almas affirmed that he must win, recalling Griffin's past words, "Those who kill without guilt are no longer human." Griffin, having listened, admits that he once spoke those words. Humans are herd creatures, some killing others without remorse. They can't protect those around them, and such people cannot coexist in a herd. Griffin tells Almas that he is different, his role is to uphold the rules. He doesn't live within the herd, he is the only one who can influence them and is outside the herd's standard rules. Therefore, whether Almas belongs to the herd or not is irrelevant. Griffin suggests it's better if he doesn't belong to the herd. After all, he can still protect them. Since Almas became a ruler, he must fulfill his duties to the herd. And he shouldn't lose sight of the bigger picture over trivial matters. Griffin warns him to listen carefully. If something is impossible in this world, it was never possible in the first place. Once a lion becomes the leader, it kills the previous leader's offspring. If Almas hesitates over a choice, he'll regret it either way. But the greatest regret is not making a decision or leaving it to others. Griffin thinks it's better if he decides quickly, whether to accept or reject it. Almas realizes that he would regret either choice because both are poor options. He thanks Griffin, having now thought it through. Griffin understands that Almas has made his decision. In King Rosas' realm, the king asks Almas if he has made his decision yet. Almas first thanks him for considering his decision. Almas knows his request is shameful but asks for Yura's hand in marriage and the country itself. Turning to Yura, he asks if she minds marrying him. Raymond laughs, noting Almas decided quicker than he thought. Everyone expected it to take another week. He even planned to persuade him if it took too long. Thus, everyone is relieved by his swift decision. Almas, confused, asks King Yura if he only gave him 3 days, or is he mistaken. The king, surprised, wonders how it could be just 3 days. Even he couldn't make such a significant decision in that time. The king says he even had a month-long plan, knowing he wouldn't survive that time. Almas looks at Yura and softly calls her name. Yura laughs loudly, thinking he would make a quicker decision when pressed for time. Ignoring his daughter's foolish act, the king genuinely wants to thank those who helped Almas make this decision. By the way, he asks if Almas has any plans upon becoming king. Almas, without hesitation, declares his intention to unify the Adelina Peninsula. The king can only exclaim what a grand plan it is. Seeing everyone's reaction, Almas laughs loudly, saying he was just joking. He silently thinks that King Firma's dream seems quite absurd. Now, the next issue everyone faces is announcing the marriage and ultimately Almas's ascension. Almas suggests that they should expedite these events within a short period, perhaps completing them in 2 days. The king understands, noting that if they finish in 2 days, Rigor won't have enough time to prepare the troops. He asks if Almas plans to immediately assemble an army after the coronation and send them to annihilate all nobles who fail to attend the ceremony. More precisely, Almas wants to gather the army even before the ceremony occurs. The king expresses his desire to abdicate while still alive, so he can depart in peace. Almas agrees it's best if it's done while the king is still alive. However, they face a problem. Almas lacks significant military achievements, essential for ascending the throne. The king mentions that King Demorger's kingdom will soon attack them. He decides to hand over his command to Almas until then, urging him to go and defeat them. He's sure they will act within the next 3 years. Almas worries if the king will still be alive by then. The king assures them, revealing a skilled voodoo sorcerer is caring for him. He will explain the details later. Almas's current task is to inform Tetra and keep this matter secret. Tetra sat listening as Almas and Yura apologized and explained everything. Tetra laughed, saying she understood and was happy to hear it. Then, she asked Yura what she was apologizing for. Yura honestly admitted it was because she wanted to marry Almas and become his primary wife. Indeed, if Almas marries Yura, he will eventually become king. This means Yura would become the primary wife, while Tetra's position would change. Tetra honestly said she wasn't upset about this at all. After all, she doesn't really care about her own status, as she will always be Almas's first wife. No matter what happens, the fact that Tetra is the first girl Almas married won't change. Tetra continued, saying status isn't important, love is. She could see Yura was more worried about status. Hearing this, Yura angrily asked what she meant by that. It sounded like Tetra was aiming for Almas's primary wife position. What comforted Almas was that after this, both Yura and Tetra could get along normally. He called everyone present to the meeting room and instructed Ron to lock the door. Boros said he didn't think Almas would gather everyone here. Bolton laughed, saying it seemed like a significant announcement was coming. Not keeping everyone in suspense, Almas directly announced he would marry Yura. Ron asked if this meant he would inherit the throne. Soyeon said she had been worried since hearing about Yura's marriage to Rigor, and now she was delighted with this news. Rose, more serious than the others, asked Almas if he had decided about the war against Dibel. Almas admitted this was the reason for everyone's troubles. He apologized for putting everyone in this situation. And unavoidably, Almas really needed everyone at this time. Graham said it was too late to feel guilty for putting them in this situation. Honestly, no one here liked that Rigor guy. Boros congratulated Almas but wanted to ask about Tetra. Hearing this, Almas immediately embraced Tetra, saying she was still his wife. Although she couldn't be the primary wife, he would never reject her. Almas also promised everyone that even after he became king, he would not leave the position of leader of Ash. Bolton said he was very happy that Princess Yura had finally found her prince. After all, he had accompanied the princess for a long time. Setting that aside, everyone knew that not only the Dibble family but all the other noble families would oppose this. Therefore, Almas had to devise a perfect plan for this situation. Almas informed everyone about his plan to attack King Demorger in case of an invasion. This achievement would at least deter opposition from the nobility. On the border between Ash and Dibble territories, Gilbert Dibble ordered all villagers to assemble. Gilbert, the second cousin of Lord Dibble and ruler of this land, looked at the newly collected grain tax and accused the village chief of deception. The chief prostrated himself, insisting that was all the village had. He pleaded for an extension to the next year, promising to pay this year's shortfall along with next year's dues. Gilbert, kicking the old man away, cursed and questioned whether the chief still had enough money for clothes this year. He ordered his soldiers to search the granary and dig up anything buried underground. Pointing to the seeds they found, Gilbert asked the chief what they were. The old man, in tears, explained they were the village's seeds for next year's planting. If taken, they would have nothing to sow. Gilbert callously offered them seeds, demanding repayment next year with interest. He looked around at all the villagers, questioning why they dared to look at him that way. He warned that he could guess what they were thinking. Suddenly, Gilbert noticed a girl who didn't belong to the village. He asked if she had moved from another territory and paid her taxes. The couple knelt, begging for mercy. The husband promised to pay everything next month. Gilbert said he would forget the taxes on one condition: the girl's first time with him. He assured them that after that, no one would bother them again. Meanwhile, Almas took Ismia to the border fortress. She immediately recognized that the construction techniques used for the fortress were about 200 years old. Despite its age, it was clear that the builders were highly skilled. Ismia thought the issue with the fortress was architectural. At a glance, she noticed many blind spots. She added that this place would be easily overrun if attacked. Inside, there were many flaws. People would bump into each other when busy. Honestly, she thought the place needed a major renovation. Almas said there was nowhere they could find stones as good as in the Ash territory. He turned to Tetra, asking if she knew of any good nearby quarries. If she remembered correctly, Dibble's territory produced the best stones in the kingdom. However, no one wanted to go there. Tetra said that just because it produced the best stones didn't mean it was the only area. She thought they could take stones from King Rosas' land. Almas agreed to this suggestion. He told Ismia he would leave the design to her. Ismia joyfully said she could complete it immediately, just by adding some suitable modifications to the design she had recently finished. When Almas and Tetra returned to the castle, Ron informed them of some developments. Entering inside, Boros reported that they had received some refugees from Dibble. Almas asked how many and if there had been any word from the Dibble family. Boros said there were about 200 people, and currently, there was no news from Dibble. Almas was surprised, asking how they could lose 200 people without noticing. First, he needed to know how many people here knew about this. Boros began counting everyone in the room, including Ron and some of their soldiers. Ron had accidentally encountered the refugees while patrolling the border, after which they decided to keep this matter secret. This also meant handling the situation carefully without alarming anyone. Soyen told Almas that a representative of the refugees wanted to meet him. The girl begged Almas to accept them. They came to Almas's territory because they couldn't afford the rent anymore. The land tax took up 30% of each person's income, plus there were clothing taxes, fruit taxes, marriage taxes, and even taxes for the deceased. Almas was puzzled about such strange taxes like marriage taxes. Ron explained that marriage tax was more like paying a wedding gift to the lord rather than to the marrying family. The girl continued, saying the relatives of the Dibble family were doing whatever they wanted without any hindrance, from robbery to murder at will. Almas said he understood and they could return to their people. Earl, who had gone to investigate, returned and confirmed the girl's story. Sometimes, they even had to sell their children. Almas asked Boros what he thought about this. Boros replied that he had heard many terrible stories about the Dibble house. Since the time Lagos ruled, there had been numerous refugees coming in. Almas was surprised that the situation had always been this bad. Everyone now wanted to know Almas's next plan. He bet that Rigor wouldn't let those who fled his territory go easily. Almas asked Boros if there was a way to pretend they didn't know about this. Boros agreed with Almas's idea, but moving people across different territories required the permission of both lords. If Almas decided to shelter these refugees, it would be against the law. Boros added, however, if Almas decided to protect them upon learning about their situation, King Rosais, who would judge the case in court, would support him. So even if they were discovered, there wouldn't be any issues. But it would still be better to keep this matter a secret. Almas decided to settle the refugees in a village inside the forest, as Ria had just mentioned needing more laborers. A few days later in Ash territory, Soyen rushed in to inform Almas that Rigor had arrived. Almas asked if he was here and how many people he brought. Surprisingly, Rigor only brought a few bodyguards. Almas thought he arrived sooner than expected, wondering how much he knew about the refugees. He instructed Soyen to welcome Rigor politely and prepare a meal, believing Rigor would be less aggressive if well fed. Their focus was to lower his guard. Once everything was prepared, Almas invited Rigor inside. Rigor laughed loudly, thanking him for the hospitality, and began to eat slowly. Almas thought he was more docile than expected, strangely so. He didn't know whether he was feeling comfortable because of the meal or something else. Almas decided to ask him after the meal. He inquired about the wind that had brought him here. Rigor told him that indeed a number of people had fled from his territory. He believed some of them were seeking protection in this area. Rigor asked if he knew anything about them. Almas of course knew, but he was sure not to let it show, only a fool would. He sincerely apologized, saying he had no knowledge of it, and promised to start an investigation immediately. Almas didn't need to know the truth, but he was sure he had erased all traces of the refugees. And without any evidence, the other couldn't make any demands. He intentionally said that according to the laws of the kingdom, permission from the Lord was needed to move from one territory to another, hoping he would remember. Almas said he really didn't understand what he was talking about, but if he found any refugees, he would report immediately. Almas and Tetra stood high up watching Rigor's group leave. He had once thought the refugees were a trap of his, but it seemed not. Now their job was to wait and see what his next move would be. Rigor returned to his territory, angrily scolding everyone he met. He ordered his men to summon Balmet and Gilbert. Gilbert was sure that the refugees had gone to Ash territory. Though they came from a village under his supervision, he was sure they couldn't have gone far beyond the Ash domain. They could have gone to Demorger, but it would take several days, so they couldn't have gone unnoticed. Belmet calmly said they had no evidence to take to court. They had no choice but to let this go, but at least Rigor had managed to warn Almas. He said next time there's a conflict with Almas, they could use this as an excuse to threaten. A week later, something terrible happened. The situation became serious when a large group of refugees from Dibble territory arrived in Ash. As soon as Gilbert's men discovered this, they sent 1,000 soldiers to guard the border. Almas said with over 1,000 soldiers near his territory, he couldn't ignore it. Almas ordered 700 of his soldiers and all 300 reserves to the border. Almas asked Bolton if he could do that right now. Bolton assured him to leave it to him, as he always has 1,000 soldiers ready for battle. Tetra asked Almas if he was planning to invade Dibble's territory. He said of course not. The number of soldiers he needed now was just a precaution in case Dibble's soldiers crossed the border. Bolton laughed heartily, saying it would be interesting if it turned into a battle. It was a good opportunity for everyone to potentially kill Rigor. Almas said it was rare for him to hear such words from him. But if he caused an unnecessary war now, they would be more cautious of him. This could later cause trouble with the wedding and plans for succession to the throne. Almas told Bolton they needed to leave early to be prepared for any eventuality. When he arrived, he received news that Belmet had come. He was Rigor's close advisor and known to be competent. Belmet wanted to ask him why he had brought his soldiers here. Almas calmly said that he had brought Dibel's soldiers to the border first. Almas let him know he had no intention of fighting. As long as they don't try to attack the people of Ash or try to cross the border, he would surely do nothing. After a while on the other side of the river, Bolton observed the group of refugees had reached the location of the soldiers. He said it seemed like they were on the other side of the fence, they would have to cross it to move on. Even though they were 1,000 in number, half of them were women and elderly, making it difficult to cross the river. Almas said he just hoped nothing bad would happen. Cries for help and mercy started to be heard. Bolton saw the refugees had broken the barrier. It was terrible, like a one-sided massacre. Ron shouted to Almas, suggesting they should save the innocent children. Almas said no matter what, they couldn't go out there themselves. Finally, among the numerous fallen, a young man made it to the riverbank. Coincidentally, he was the one whose wife had been taken away by Gilbert a few days earlier. After his wife returned, she immediately hanged herself. He no longer had the strength to stay in the village. All memories with his wife had turned into nightmares. Right now, he was just running aimlessly along with the others, with no specific goal. Around him, the elderly and children were being brutally killed. He kept calling for help towards Almas, but no one acted, realizing it had nothing to do with them. He then thought of a plan to draw Gilbert's soldiers' attention by continuously shooting arrows, using this as a chance to run towards Almas. Finally, just as he fell into the river, an arrow from Gilbert's forces struck a person from the Ash tribe. Almas, holding the arrow, asked Bolton if he thought this was an accident. He said he didn't think so, it couldn't be an accident. Almas then asked if he thought this was an act that could start a war. Bolton replied that no one had the right to shoot a king, and their side must declare they had no hostile intentions. Bolton, looking at the young man who just died in the river, thought that although he didn't know his name, he could understand his feelings. Anyway, for now, his purpose was achieved, he could rest in peace. Almas, holding the arrow, raised it high and shouted for everyone's attention. He proclaimed that Dibel's army had just attacked him, an act that initiated war. From this moment, Ash's army would annihilate them. A Dibel soldier cried out in desperation that it was just an accident. Almas shouted back, calling that an accident unacceptable. Belmet cursed Gilbert for his stupidity to dare shoot an arrow into Ash territory. Seeing the situation worsening, Dibel's army tried to escape. Almas ordered Bolton to ignore them and first protect the refugees. The next day in King Rosas' kingdom, the king couldn't believe Almas would do such a thing. He always thought him to be more composed. Almas knelt down, sincerely apologizing. Raymond beside him said that ever since the Lord abandoned them, the truth is they had started following Almas. The king stated that a king should not act on impulse, and Ray was spoiling his son. In the end, Almas had saved many refugees and had no regrets. However, he genuinely felt sorry towards the king. The trial would not take place. Instead, Rigger demanded a holy duel to resolve the matter. In other words, Almas had to fight to determine who was right and wrong. Ray said this time his son had enough evidence to support him, so there was no need for a duel. The king said Almas had the right to refuse, but it would affect his reputation. People would call him a coward or say he was really lying. He bet Belmet came up with this strategy. He wanted to clear his name after the defeat by proposing this. Almas said but if he accepted it, there's no guarantee he'd win in a duel. Ray told his son that although Rigger is a fool, he is the strongest man in the kingdom. And he's stronger than anyone, which is why Belmet thought of this duel. Almas recalled their arm wrestling match at the party. Although he won, he had to admit Rigger was really strong. Almas wondered if Rigger really had some kind of blessing. Yura, hearing about Almas, also came to see the situation. She informed him that indeed Rigger has a blessing and coincidentally, it's similar to Almas's. Almas asked if it's really normal for many people to have the same blessing. Yura said she thinks it's very rare to find someone with the king's blessing. Not to mention that his is similar to Rigger's, which is truly unusual. The king said he doesn't want to rely on uncertain strength. But if Almas believes he can defeat Rigger, the king wants him to accept the duel. If Almas wins this battle, he will completely extinguish the influence of the Dibel family. And at the same time, he will affirm his position as the next king. Almas asked if he could inquire about the rules of the duel first. Yura explained that the duel is basically one-on-one. The referee, who will be her, the high priestess, will decide the winner. The duel is a fight to the death, so he will be declared the winner upon killing his opponent. However, she will declare a winner if one of the two faints or surrenders. Almas can choose his weapon freely, but to honor the long-standing tradition, he should not use ranged weapons. People will look down on him if he uses such weapons. Almas said he understood and accepted the duel. The king said he would convey this to Rigger and the duel would start a week from now. Almas took the whole story once more to meet Griffin and told him everything. He said he understood that basically, he needed a sword for use, not for sale. Griffin gave Almas a large sword, the only one among all that had wounded him. The sword was made of Damascus dragon steel. The condition he set was that when Almas returned, he shouldn't bring the sword back because it smelled too strong. Belmet told Rigger that honestly, he never thought Almas would agree to this fight. Rigger laughed, it didn't matter, he just needed to win the duel. He asked if Belmet thought he couldn't win. Belmet said Rigger was the strongest in the kingdom, but they must be prepared for surprises. Rigger laughed loudly, saying he was overly worried. The day of the duel arrived quickly. Yura declared that the loser of this duel must acknowledge their wrongdoing and, as previously agreed, forfeit land and property. Almas thought this was his first duel against someone else with a blessing, let alone someone with a similar blessing as his. A normal sword wouldn't stand a chance against the power of such a blessing, but with Griffin's sword, Almas felt extremely reassured. During the duel, Almas quickly noticed Rigger's weakness. He was entirely reliant on his blessing for swordsmanship. Although it seemed he had some knowledge of sword fighting, he made many unnecessary movements. Almas thought if this was all he had, it wasn't enough to defeat King Fern. Almas also quickly ended the battle before Rigger's pleas for mercy and surrender. The holy duel ended with Almas's victory. The Dibel family had to hand over all their property and land to the Ash family. Additionally, Dibel had to send an official apology to Almas. The king looked at Rigger, scolding him that his autocratic rule was the root of today's troubles, which was very concerning. He wanted Rigger to change and rectify it when he returned. Almas didn't expect the king to also reprimand the internal affairs of his family. He felt sorry for those who had cheered for Rigger, who were now extremely embarrassed. Almas hoped that next time they wouldn't support the wrong house. The next day, Almas went back to the palace, where the king praised him for doing well. Almas said that he didn't kill Rigger because he didn't want to become a person stained with blood. The king said it was really better that Almas didn't kill Rigger. If he had really killed him, some people would have resented him. After all, even if he killed Rigger, the Dibel family would continue. Almas asked the king what the good side of it was. Since Rigger surrendered in that holy duel, everyone would see him as a coward. That means Rigger brought shame to the Dibel family. Yura then said she's sure the nobles who supported him are now fleeing. While other nobles, close or related by blood to the Dibel family, are looking for an excuse to distance themselves at this time. Almas asked if surrendering in the duel was really a bad thing. Yura told him to listen, surrendering in a holy duel carries more weight than he thinks. Moreover, the nobles are also warriors. Once they enter a duel, the only acceptable outcome for them is victory or death. Not to mention, Rigger was the one who challenged him from the start. Ray told his son to listen carefully. There are two things that people expect from a king: governance and warfare. Everyone knew how bad the other side of Rigger was, but his combat skills were superior to many. Most people thought of him as a superhero in that aspect, but he lost the battle without a fight. The king said in this case, he has the right not to keep the marriage arrangement with Rigger anymore. If he says he doesn't want to give Yura to a man who surrendered in a holy duel, it's an acceptable reason. Clearly, he doesn't have the qualifications to be a king. Yura excitedly asked her father if he really meant it. The king said exactly, he has no reason to let his daughter marry Rigger. He told everyone not to misunderstand, it doesn't mean he will accept Almas. But he can't leave the throne vacant for too long and will soon announce the marriage of the two. Ray asked if it's better if Almas does something wonderful. The king said in such a case, they don't need a big achievement anymore. Frankly speaking, the king wanted to strengthen the kingdom before waging war against Damagar. Therefore, the marriage of the two could be said to be perfect for achieving this. Another matter concerned Belmet. They needed to find a way to get him to leave Rigger's side. Most of Rigger's followers were related by blood, making them mostly foolish. But Belmet was different, a loyal subordinate of the Dibel family, and those with him were competent people. The nobles also placed a lot of trust in him. It wouldn't be surprising to say that the Dibel family was supported by that man. Almas shifted to another topic, asking about diplomacy. The king said it was hard for any kingdom to catch his attention. Almas suggested that forming a good relationship wouldn't be bad, more precisely establishing an alliance with that kingdom. What Almas was concerned about was the kingdom of Alvis, a nomadic kingdom located to the east of the Rosais kingdom. The king knew they were the people across the volcanic belt. And recently the Ash family had formed a cavalry unit of Germani's people. Thanks to that, he had heard of a nomadic nation from Ainz. Damagar, in the end, if they entered the war, would be stronger than this kingdom. If they faced them directly, there would be no way to win. It meant Rosais would be trapped in a defensive battle. In that case, the existence of cavalry soldiers is extremely important. The people of Adelnia don't focus much on cavalry. Therefore, by training a cavalry army, Rosais will have an advantage over other kingdoms. The current issue is how to get war horses. Almas said he wanted to get war horses from the Alva people or even hire some of their mercenaries. The king understood, but the language barrier with them would make trading impossible. The king wanted to invite the person who had contacted them and hear from that person. In this case, the person called was Ainz, who had conducted some transactions with the Alva people in the past. Ainz was called to inform them about the Alva people. He said their ancestors, the horse riders, had ruled the land. They were surrounded and isolated by the Alva mountain range from the outside world. Their population was extremely low. He heard that there were only about 1,000 people. They also have a peculiar custom of placing a block to press on the nose when young. Therefore, their faces looked more intimidating to frighten enemies. Ainz told everyone not to worry, they had stopped doing that to their noses. Boros said he sometimes also traded with the Alva people for wool and other goods. Since they were isolated behind the mountain range, they didn't face many wars. Bolton thought it would be reassuring to have the Alva horse riders with them. He was sure they were also worried about Damagar's continuous conquests to the south. Rose was sent as an envoy, and since an envoy had been sent, Almas didn't need to do anything else. They started with the first agreement, sending them wheat, salt, and wine. In return, the Exus tribe would send wool and horses, a mutually beneficial agreement easily accepted. Almas thought they were really looking for a trading partner. After a while, everything went smoothly, and they were able to make a lot of profit. Things started to change when the two sides became quite close. Earl came to Almas today to report that he had just received information from a spy. It seems there was a movement of the Morgar army. According to the spy, perhaps in June, they were targeting wheat harvests and simultaneous invasions. Earl said he would prepare for the invasion and Almas should do the same. Almas said he understood and would complete preparations by May. He would start by recruiting soldiers in the Ash territory. Next, he would implement an alliance with the Exus tribe. He guessed it was time for him to visit Exus personally. On this trip, Almas was accompanied by Yura, who came with them on this journey. This was because when Almas told them he wanted to negotiate with the leader of the Exus tribe, they said they wanted to meet Yura, a famous voodoo practitioner. The person who welcomed Almas was named Mutsio, the second son of the tribe leader. He greeted Almas first and then Yura. Yura, following protocol, greeted Mutsio back, saying she was the princess representing King Rosais, and was very happy to meet everyone. Then it was Almas's turn to state the purpose of his visit, which was to talk about the alliance and expand the trade agreement. Mutsio patted Almas on the back and told him there was no need for formalities. Alma said if that was the case, he would stop being formal. He immediately changed his attitude, telling him not to pat his back like that, as it really hurt. Matsuo laughed loudly, apologizing for that, and then turned his attention to the stirrups on Yura's horse. He was curious if this tool helped Yura ride better. Almas thought the stirrup quickly caught Matsuo's attention. He praised the stirrup as a wonderful tool and asked if Almas could teach him how to make it. Almas declined, saying that next time he would bring an envoy with him. He knew making a stirrup wasn't difficult, and one could probably imitate it just by looking at it. Moving on from this topic, Yura praised the wool provided by Matsuo's tribe as truly excellent. The truth is, the wool from the Rosais kingdom couldn't compete. Matsuo proudly said their secret was feeding the sheep high-quality grass and ensuring they exercised. But if Yura said so, he had to admit that the wheat from Ash was also exceptional. They couldn't grow wheat as well in their place, so he hoped to learn the secret by all means. Yura honestly replied she didn't have much knowledge about agriculture. Matsuo then turned to Almas, assuming he was very knowledgeable about agriculture, and asked for guidance. Almas said he could, but he couldn't advise without first seeing their techniques. In general, growing crops requires three things: water, light, and soil nutrients. If any of these three elements is missing, the crops can't grow. The one thing humans can easily control in this case is the soil. Soil nutrients are like food provided to the crops. Initially, all soil has nutrients, but the problem is they gradually deplete. Matsuo finally understood why their harvests were diminishing. He asked if controlling soil nutrients could be managed, right? Almas thought first, they needed to let the soil rest. Almas said there were other ways, but he could only discuss them after they formed an alliance. Matsuo praised him for being wise, giving him another reason to convince his father to form an alliance. Almas realized that Matsuo supported the progressive and agricultural side and was also supporting the alliance. Yura asked Matsuo if the Exus leader was against the alliance. Matsuo said his father was indeed conservative. He also disliked farming because he felt it disrupted the land. And he wasn't really in favor of trading either. The same went for the alliance. He thought it was foolish to let their people be killed for the benefit of others' wars. Almas thought it crucial that the king of Exus was against the alliance. But from what Almas could gather here, it seemed that the king was not stubborn. Although he hated farming, he did not oppose it. He neither agreed with opening trade nor objected to it. Almas could conclude that he was overlooking it for profit. He felt they could persuade this king if he explained the profits instead of the risks. Matsuo led everyone towards his territory. After crossing the mountains, the sun had also set. Matsuo ordered his men to quickly set up yurts. Almas asked if a yurt was a house for nomads, right? Matsuo was thrilled that he knew about yurts. At that moment, a panicked soldier ran in, reporting that a fierce dragon was heading this way. Matsuo yelled at the soldier for allowing this to happen. The soldier kept apologizing, thinking it would be safe since the beast didn't appear at night. Almas thought, although he knew they existed, this was the first time he saw a monster other than Griffin. Matsuo explained to everyone that a dragon was coming, so he would find a safer place for everyone. Matsuo's eyes fell on Yura's sword, and he understood the problem. Matsuo asked Almas if he was confident he could help them hunt the dragon. The rampaging dragon was basically a two-legged, meat-eating dragon with steel-hard fins. They could inflict wounds on it by aiming at the gaps between its scales. Matsuo decided he and Almas would act as bait for everyone to have time to evacuate. Its weakness was slower than horses and couldn't see clearly in the dark. If the two tried to run as fast as possible, they could escape it. And they didn't need to take risks, just try to drive it away or run as fast as possible when in danger. The two easily executed the plan, drawing the dragon's attention to chase them. Almas said it looked more like a tyrant than a dragon, completely different from what he imagined. Matsuo said he would poke it a bit, but unfortunately, Almas fell off his horse while it was chasing them. He angrily scolded the stupid horse, although he had named it, it still betrayed him. Matsuo said he would cook that horse when they find it again. He asked what the two should do now. The dragon would catch up if they rode on one horse. Almas apologized for causing trouble for Muscho, then drew his sword, standing ready to face the approaching dragon. Muscho stood beside Almas, reassuring him that he would introduce him to a better horse. When the dragon arrived, Almas directly went forward to stab it. Muscho was surprised that someone would stab a dragon from the front like that. But he realized this was not good at all and rushed to help Almas. Almas was equally surprised by Muscho, who could shoot an arrow through the dragon's shell, something his sword couldn't do. Then there was a gust of wind in the same direction as the arrow, heading straight for the dragon. Almas seized this opportunity to easily take it down. Muscho admired him, saying that killing a dragon with his physical strength was incredible. He hoped to know the secret behind it. That night, while drinking together, Muscho again brought up the topic, wanting to know about Almas's strength. Almas calmly said he didn't mind telling him but also wanted to know why Muscho could control the wind. Muscho laughed, confirming his suspicion. It was his blessing. Muscho had a blessing that allowed him to control the wind, what they called a spirit's blessing. By now, Almas knew of 4 people who had been blessed, including himself. In today's conversation, Almas also learned that some poor people in Exus were so destitute they had to sell their goats annually just to survive. Moreover, a beneficial point was that Almas's cereals and rice could be preserved longer than cheese. Muscho revealed to him that perhaps his father needed a bit more profit. And the remaining part depended on Princess Yura. The Exus clan leader was looking forward to whether Yura would agree to heal Muscho's stepmother. The Exus tribe leader had 3 wives, referred to as the first empress, the second consort queen, and the third consort queen. Muscho was the son of the second queen, while the crown prince, Medil, was born to the third empress. The third prince, on the other hand, was born to the first empress. The person Yura was currently treating was the third empress. The third empress anxiously asked Yura if her illness could be treated. Yura reassured her, believing it was possible. She turned to the others and announced she would have to perform the ritual right now, so she asked everyone to leave the room. The ritual was to be a secret, after all. Waiting until everyone had left, Yura told the third empress to listen carefully. Her weakness was not due to illness. The third empress looked at Yura, puzzled. Not due to illness. Yura explained it was more of a curse, a very intricate one. Though it didn't have an immediate effect, essentially, it was a curse that gradually weakened the body. Yura believed that the empress was surrounded by some cursed objects. She asked if the empress could think of anything. Still bewildered, the third empress had never thought she could be under a curse. Yura mentioned it could be something she had received about 2 or 3 months before her health started to decline, something she had kept until now. The empress, even with Yura's hints, couldn't think of anything. Yura then asked directly if she had received anything from the first and second queens. The third empress took out a necklace, saying she received it from the second queen for the new year. Yura examined it and asked if there was anything else. The empress brought out a pillow from her bed, a gift from the first empress. Yura sniffed it and confirmed it was the item. She opened the pillow to find a dead scorpion inside, a poison called goo. Yura said she would reverse the curse, essentially sending it back to the voodoo practitioner who cast it. This way, it wouldn't harm the first queen. Yura also gave the empress a sachet of medicine to cleanse the effects, advising her to always keep it with her. Yura returned and recounted everything to Almas. Almas understood that power struggles were common everywhere. Rosice commented that Almas was right, though it would also be a problem if there was no crown prince, like in the current Rosice kingdom. Almas was more interested in what Muscho would think about this. Although he seemed passionate, Almas didn't think he was suited for politics. The next day, Almas and Muscho went to deal with the dragon's carcass from the night before. Almas asked Muscho if he would mind splitting it into 2 equal parts. Muscho had no objections, but the real issue here was Shinkin and Gekurin. Muscho questioned how they could divide these, as they were not something they could split. Shinkin is a special metal found in the dragon's heart, while Gekurin is a unique part growing externally. Muscho said that at some point, he needed to prepare for married life, so if possible, he wanted the Gekurin for its decorative value. Almas agreed to take Shinkin, even though he also needed it for his marriage preparations. However, he could still ask Ainz to sell it later. Muscho apologized for asking Almas about dividing the dragon, essentially because he had killed it. Almas said it was okay and, putting that aside, he wanted a good horse. Muscho laughed, saying there was no need to worry and took him to choose a horse. Muscho asked if Almas had any specific requirements for the horse. Almas thought it would be great if it were brave, as Sway was an obedient horse but eventually abandoned him out of fear. He would consider the horses before making a decision, and if not satisfied, he would look for another one. Muscho took Almas to a place with many horses. Almas was impressed, indeed worthy of Exus. He noticed they had many good horses here. Muscho said he could choose any horse he wanted, all of them were quite good. Almas asked if he could choose a horse from the inside area. Muscho informed him that those were Mara's, but he could choose one if he liked, although they weren't as good as the horses here. Almas spotted a proud-looking black horse. He tested it with fireworks, and while the other horses were frightened, the black one remained calm as if nothing happened. Even Muscho was startled, running over to ask what Almas was doing. Almas pointed to the black horse, saying he would choose it, as it wasn't startled by the noise. Muscho looked at the horse and said it wasn't a good idea. The horse had a black spot in its eye, and legend says it would call upon bad spirits. Moreover, its mother died immediately after giving birth to it. Not to mention that in a recent fire, all the horses in the stable were burned alive except for it. Almas laughed loudly, saying it seems there are no issues except for its own bad luck. Muscho couldn't deny the fact that its mother was a fine horse and it itself was a strong horse. If Almas wanted to take it, he could, but if he gets killed by it, he shouldn't come back seeking revenge. Almas asked if he was being threatened, declaring he would ride it for a test. In the capital of the Exus tribe, today Almas and Yura had the opportunity to meet their king. Yura expressed her honor in meeting him, saying she came as a representative of King Rosais. King Exus first thanked them for their help. He urged Almas to get straight to the point of today's discussion. He acknowledged the alliance proposal as generous but somewhat lacking. He admitted his tribe was poor. Indeed, food from Almas's kingdom would be beneficial for them, but it was too cheap for the demands of life. The king added that it meant they would also have to oppose the kingdom of Damagar. He informed Almas they were already struggling against their enemy, the Lupus tribe. Since subduing the Ares tribe, they had gradually encroached on his territory. If they formed an alliance with the kingdom of Damagar, it would be a significant threat to him, and he wanted to know what Almas thought about this. Almas pondered that the reasons presented were somewhat similar to what Muscho had told him. He argued that what the king had just said was precisely why they should form a two-way alliance. If Damagar attacked Rosais, the Exus tribe would have to assist. Conversely, if the Lupus tribe attacked, he would also help them. King Exus found this an interesting proposal, but essentially it would be a plus and minus situation. He would only accept the proposal if it had more positives. Almas inquired if his successor would be Prince Metal, right? As a prince, they should add his name to the Spirit Pact. And if possible, Almas also wanted to add the names of Prince Muscho and Prince Lidos, this way Prince Metal's position would be more secure. The king felt it wasn't bad at all, but the health situation of King Rosais was his concern. Almas said he needn't worry because the next in line would support the alliance. King Exus looked at Almas, laughed heartily, and said bluntly that it would be him. Seeing the reactions of the two, he could guess as much. Of course, he would learn more about the nation he was about to collaborate with. After all, both of them were too easy to read. He advised Almas, who was to become a king, to practice concealing his emotions. And both of them could rest assured that he would keep this matter as secret as the curse they were to keep hidden. He declared that from now on, Almas had his support. He knew this meant little when he was just a minister of a nomadic tribe. Almas thanked him, revealing that forming an alliance with him was a condition for him to become king. Therefore, their alliance was the very thing that completed it. With this achievement, Almas was assured the honor of becoming the next king of Rosais and fulfilling the condition to marry Yura. Meanwhile, in the territory of Ash, Earl had gathered a list of people from the Dibble household and the power within the clan. 2 villagers from Dibble, now under Earl's command, were amazed that he could accomplish this. Earl laughed, saying that he was once a merchant, so he still had some connections. He knew the power division within the Dibble house was simple. It was split into 2 factions, those close to rigor and those not. The leader of the first faction was Gibbert, and the leader of the other was Belmet. The important pillars of the Dibble clan all came from the Dibble house, while the main tasks were handled by outsiders like Belmet. It was truly a terrible family system where those who should have power didn't, and outsiders held the power. The 2 asked Earl why those people didn't stand up instead of following the Dibble's commands. Earl explained that it was related to the history of the kingdom. First, 2 influential families were weakened to one after the destruction of Ash. Then, it related to the rumors about the health of King Rosice. As rumors spread, people thought Dibble would take power, and the cunning ones gathered under the Dibble clan. However, Rigor, foolishly, did not realize this and treated them terribly. Belmet was the one who created jobs for them, and essentially, he was a savior. Earl was now trying to convince the faction without family ties. He produced a list, hoping the 2 could help him find the people on it. A few days later, the 2 returned to report good news. They had narrowed down the most trustworthy people. First was Yosef, the leader of a 100-man team, Dora, a dog trainer, and Amerigo, a language expert. It would be excellent if the Ash clan accepted them. Earl decided first to check them out. He would decide whether to invite them to leave the Dibble faction after getting to know them. The first person Earl approached was Yosef, the commander of the 100-man team, also the one who had commanded the last team that could fight against King Firm in the previous war. Earl thought he had to try his best today to leave a good impression or greeting. Earl greeted him, introducing himself as a merchant, and offered a bag of distilled liquor, asking if he'd like to try it. Yosef was surprised, looking at the liquor and asking how he got it. He happily drank, saying it was only the second time he had this type of liquor, the first being at a harvest festival. Earl also showed him a whole radish. Yosef apologized, saying he didn't have enough money to buy such expensive things. Earl expressed respect for a talented commander living so modestly. Yosef, led by Earl, asked if he could get paid more in another area. Earl said no kingdom treats its commanders so poorly. He kindly gave the radish for free to Yosef's 2 children. Earl promised to meet them again, and Yosef and his children kept thanking him. Turning away, Earl smiled secretly, having completed his plan. Now, he would continue to meet the other 2. At the Dibble mansion, he angrily scolded everyone, asking what had happened. Yosef, Dora, and Amerigo had all simultaneously submitted applications to serve another clan. Belmet said he believed they were planning to work hard and obey the Ash clan. But as long as they paid the valid transfer tax, the transfer would be executed. If Rigor wanted to keep them now without them committing any crime, it would only worsen his already bad reputation. Rigor said he wanted to go to the Ash territory and asked to prepare a horse for him. Belmet asked what his plan was and pleaded for him to stop. Even if Rigor went there, he would just be rejected. A few days later, Gilbert reported that 10 more people had moved to the Ash territory. He also talked about the rumor among the vassals that Belmet was working for King Rosice from behind, orchestrating his failure. Rigor said it was ridiculous, he would never do such a thing. Gilbert urged him to think about the holy battle proposal, which was Belmet's idea. It was impossible that he would suggest it without forethought. Gilbert was sure he knew about Almas's strength. Rigor, hearing this, turned dark and asked if Gilbert meant that Belmet knew but still urged him to challenge. Gilbert warned him not to trust anyone outside the main branch. Meanwhile, Earl's plan was going extremely well. Although he only took 13 people from Dibble, it was enough to get internal information about the Dibble clan and cause chaos in their ranks. Earl was confident that no one could stop his plan now. Earl's man expressed difficulty in spreading rumors about Belmet, not to mention the enormous cost. Earl said they had no other choice, as those working under Dibble, though treated like trash, were hard to attract. Earl's final target was Belmet's fortress. Getting that person would ensure the success of his plan. Earl's man continued to question if they should really continue, as the Dibble house was already on the brink of destruction, and even without their intervention, they were no longer strong enough to pose a threat. Earl disagreed, especially with Belmet still there. If Belmet was as smart as rumored, he would have realized the fact about King Rose's plan to make Almas the next king. Another truth was that Rigger no longer had the ability to win. Once Almas became king, Dibble would be cornered. Belmet would try even harder to seize the throne by any means. Of course, they didn't have the strength to do it alone, which is why they would seek help from Damagars. Earl recalled the attack by King Fern, where Rigger did not leave his territory. Despite his strength, he was a coward. Earl could see that above all, Rigger was proud, so he would never ask for help from another kingdom. Unless someone pushed him, and the only one who could do that was Belmet. Moreover, if Dibble demoted Belmet, there would surely be a rebellion, not from the main house. Therefore, taking down Belmet was something Earl couldn't overlook if he wanted this strategic goal to succeed. Earl acknowledged the hard work his man had put in over the past few days. But now, they just needed one final push to complete the strategy. On the other side, Gilbert quickly found Rigger to report that a suspicious person had appeared at Belmet's house. As Rigger had previously ordered, everyone at the main house was under surveillance, and it was now confirmed that an unknown person had visited Belmet's mansion. Following the trail, the unknown person had headed towards the Ash territory. Gilbert reluctantly said that although he didn't want to suggest it, some subordinates thought Belmet was working for Almas. Rigger, even though he didn't think Belmet would betray him, decided to relieve doubts by having someone follow Belmet. If nothing surfaced in a week, then Belmet would be considered clean. Earl was delighted to receive good news. The rumors had now reached Rigger. At that moment, at Belmet's house, he was secretly writing a letter to the king of Demorgar. He hoped this secret letter would create a lifeline for the Dibbles. But outside, there was a rumor that Belmet had betrayed the clan. He didn't know if it was Ash or Gilbert trying to use this for their benefit. Regardless, he needed to stay vigilant. Just then, he was informed that an envoy from the Ash clan had come looking for him. Knowing the person wanted to meet Belmet, he instructed to make up some excuses and send them away. Earl, not waiting to be turned away, entered and greeted Belmet, knowing that their clans had never gotten along. With what he just said, Earl hoped this visit would start a good relationship between the two clans. Earl apologized for speaking out but wanted to sit down and discuss the recent conflicts with him. Belmet bluntly hoped Earl would do this in Rigger's presence. Earl calmly said of course, but today he hoped Belmet would spare some time to accept the gift he brought. Earl had his men open boxes full of gold, hoping to start a good relationship. Belmet shouted that there was no reason for him to accept the gift and told them to leave quickly. Earl promptly left as told, but secretly left the gold at Belmet's door. By the time Belmet realized, it was too late. Later, due to disappointment and lack of trust from Rigger, Belmet's illness relapsed, and he passed away at the age of 82. While Almas was forming an alliance with the Exus tribe and Earl was sabotaging the Dibble house, in the 6th month, Demorgar finally invaded the Ash territory. The king called for a meeting of all the court members. He announced that, as everyone knew, Demorgar had sent troops to their territory. Therefore, he was assigning Almas to repel this attack. The king asked Almas to step forward and accept the mission. Almas confidently declared to everyone that he was Almas and would bring victory to Rosais. Yura came specially to see Almas off to the battlefield, regretting that she couldn't join him. Notably, no one from the Dibble family attended the meeting that day. And Rigger had ultimately refused to send troops. Almas suspected he did this not wanting him to gain power. He said he would leave the capital in Yura's care to go into battle with peace of mind. On his way to Ash, Ron, agitated, ran to Almas. Almas calmly asked what was the matter and how many soldiers they would face. Ron loudly said there were 25,000 soldiers. On their side, they had 10,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry, plus 2,000 cavalry from the Exus tribe. In total, about 13,000 men. In summary, They were facing an enemy with double their forces. Ron complained that normally they could gather more forces than this. He asked Almas if he thought it was because other families had sent too few troops. Almas replied that though Rigger had lost power, he was still the head of the Dibble house. If he refused, other families under him would do the same. Not to mention the possibility of him colluding with the Kingdom of Demorger. That's why Almas had left some soldiers to protect the capital. Almas told Ron not to worry too much as neighboring countries had declared they would not intervene. So things weren't as bad as they seemed. The Tetla plains were right in front of them, and the fortress gradually came into view. Ron looked at the fortress in surprise, noting how strong it appeared now. Almas informed everyone that although it was an old fortress, it had recently been renovated. Ismia's skills were truly amazing. She had not only renovated the outer wall but also upgraded the equipment. Almas ordered the commander to give a brief orientation about the fortress to the new soldiers. The commander told Almas to rest during this time. Almas advised the others to also rest for the time being. Almas spent time returning to Ash Castle. Tetra asked him how many thousands of soldiers they were facing this time and if they had a chance of winning. Almas said that normally they wouldn't stand a chance, but he had already made plans. To win this battle, there were two main points. First, the enemy's large number of soldiers meant they needed a lot of food. So, Almas planned to destroy their supply route. Second, Demorger's position with neighboring countries wasn't good. If he could successfully persuade those countries to help, Almas said they could win this time, and Tetra needn't worry. Tenino, thinking Demorger's troops were sitting next to Prince Carlo, talked about the upcoming battle. Tenino felt disrespectful saying this, but Carlo was incompetent. Yet, he still highly regarded him. After all, Carlo understood his lack of talent, a hard thing to admit. Carlo delegated all work to competent people, trusted all his subordinates, and took responsibility for their actions. Tenino pointed to the fortress ahead, saying the enemy wasn't just the troops stationed there. If they advanced and ignored the fortress, they would face a pincer attack. Although he didn't want to think about it, in case of defeat, their retreat would largely depend on the fortress. Tenino's plan was first to scout the enemy forces and send out slaves. Carlo wondered if it was too late to bypass the fortress. Tenino disagreed. They had a huge army, so their food supplies would only last a few days. Without secure supply lines, they would surely starve. Tenino silently laughed, thinking the man was relying on him, promising to make him a general someday. Carlo, observing this, asked what he was laughing at. Tenino said it was nothing, just his lack of focus. From their high fortress, Ron and Graham saw the enemy approaching, signaling the start of the first attack. Ron noted their poor equipment and guessed they were slaves. Graham commanded his men not to aim for targets but to create a rain of arrows. Waiting for the right moment, Graham then ordered to shoot at them when they slowed down to cross the barricade. Ron was surprised to see them using wood and jumping into the water trench, questioning if they were trying to commit mass suicide. Graham said they were safer underwater and, without armor, could swim easily. The group began tying logs together to form a bridge. Graham calmly watched them climb up, then used his bow to shoot them one by one. At the Demorger army camp, Tenino had hoped for a slave to climb the wall, but it was unsuccessful. He ordered the execution of the slaves who returned, recording their names and faces to kill their families. For those slaves who sacrificed themselves, their families would be freed. Tenino, looking at the bridge, said their sacrifice had resulted in a bridge across the moat. But then the bridge exploded. He commented on the concerning presence of explosives. Carlo laughed, asking if it was time to end the plan. It seemed their plan was back to square one, and he wondered what Tenino would do next. Tenino said not to worry, this was just a test. Now that he knew the enemy had explosives, the next step was complete. He announced they would begin attacking the fortress now. Almas noted that they had successfully repelled the slaves. He asked Tetra if any towers were damaged, but it seemed all were fine. A good start, but the real battle was just beginning. The enemy hadn't sent their real army yet. Both looked towards a siege tower, easy to build with many hands. He saw they were trying to close the gap. Archers from the other side started shooting non-stop. They were trying to keep everyone busy while their people approached the tower. Tetra guessed they were underestimating the black powder, which was good. The archers inside the tower also began to attack. Tetra dodged, saying this was really bad. Almas tried to reach the range of the catapult, a weapon designed by Izmia. He would use something worse to throw down at them. The range of the catapult wasn't far, so he had to make sure they were close enough. The launched stone exploded. Tetra guessed it was filled with black powder. Almas thought the tower was made of wood, which would blow away easily, but it wasn't damaged at all. Almas realized they had used wet hides to cover the surface. But this wasn't enough to withstand the black powder. They needed to do something else. Almas wondered if the girls on the other side were trying to reinforce the towers with voodoo magic. Tonino told Carlo that indeed the towers were covered with wet hides, followed by a layer of metal. And voodoo magic was the final touch to resist explosions. He was aware of the black powder. Although he knew they wouldn't let his tower approach without doing anything, by making their explosives ineffective, he could demoralize them. At the western fortress, where Graham was in command, he was surprised the tower withstood the explosion. Now confused about how to stop them, his only choice was to shoot arrows at them. But the current opponents were trained soldiers, quite different from the unarmed slave soldiers they had faced earlier. These soldiers wore iron armor, and since their arrows were only 70% bronze, they didn't cause much damage. Graham targeted a man in the middle of the tower giving orders, hoping to disrupt their formation by killing him. But this method was ineffective. The group still advanced as expected of trained soldiers. Soon, the enemy's siege tower reached the fortress, and they began using ladders to climb in. Ron rushed forward to protect Graham, urging everyone to run. The enemy was closing in, entering the fortress with weapons in hand.